Okay, welcome to the stream, everyone. How's it going? It's another weekend, and stupidly, you're spending it here with me. But thank you for coming by anyway. Today, guys, we have got a cracking guest on the channel, and I really appreciate her coming through. She's got one hell of a story. I hope you're sat down. I hope you've had a piss. I hope you've got coffee, because there's a hell of a lot to get through. It's a long timeline. And on today's live stream, guys, we've got Ashley Gjovik. I hope I'm not butchering her name. And we're going to be talking about her legal battle with Apple and all of the things that have happened before it, during, and after, guys. A lot of them are still ongoing. So hell of a lot to chew through today, guys. And let's welcome Ashley to the stream.
Hi.
Ashley, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Not bad. Thank you. So, first of all, we're going to give everybody kind of a background on who you are, what you did at Apple, and all of that. Because we've never actually discussed your good times at Apple before all of the controversy started. And so tell us a little bit about how you ended up at Apple, what your role was. Obviously, I don't expect you to disclose anything that's still under NDA. Anyone that's not familiar means non-disclosure agreement, means you can't fucking know about it. But that's the long and short of it. Yeah, so tell us a little bit about the good times at Apple before you kind of got to where you are now.
Yeah, so I'm Ashley Gjovik.
Gjovik, my bad.
Yeah. I joined Apple in 2015. I was at Nike before. I was running software releases at Nike. I was running all major updates to their entire supply chain for about a year, which is probably the most stressful thing I've ever done in my entire life.
That's not bad.
Yeah, they shut twice a year. They shut down the entire supply chain to make the major release. And so if you don't ramp up, you have to tell Wall Street like that moment. It was incredible. And then I was managing some digital and app releases. So Nike has its issues though, and you can like just Google Nike and discrimination and look at the news and brief yourself if you're not familiar. I was looking for something else. And I'd always been a huge fan of Apple products. I grew up on Macs, and I just had a lot of respect for Apple generally, but I didn't know that much about their internal working. And I decided to apply to Apple. And I applied to a release management team managing iOS releases. So everything it takes from, we're going to have that next iOS release in 6 months, a year, to like you actually getting it on your phone. When you would see, hey, it's time to update, there are a few releases that like I pushed the button to send to you.
Nice. That's a pretty cool position to be in, to be able to say to your friends, like, you know, that update you got on your iPhone? Yeah, I fucking sent it.
It's also very stressful. The first one I did, my boss was kind of a troll. And she was like, you know, you just updated President Obama's phone. Don't fuck Obama's phone. And I'm like, oh my God.
What happens if you fuck up Obama's phone? Do you get drone striked?
Probably. But luckily I didn't, because I'm still here. I'm not an Ash. So I joined Apple doing that. We hit it off on the interviews, and they told me even like, I don't think they were supposed to, but like that day I was interviewing, the director told me I got the job, and I've worked in HR. I was like, you're not supposed to say that yet. Like, what are you doing? But I was really excited, and I moved down in only a couple of weeks. I was in Portland, Oregon. Nike's in like Beaver and outside Portland. So just packed everything up and moved down. Was really excited. I made kind of an eye roll when you said the good times, because I landed in like one of the most hostile work environments at Apple at that point.
Really? Bit of a toxic office, was it?
And there's pockets of them across Apple. And one of the really interesting things about Apple is some people have just only good things to say. And then some people have experiences like me and a lot in between. It really depends on where you end up. And my view, I ended up, with release management, you're just so close to products. I always say like the R&D teams, and the closer you are to product, the more toxic everything seems to be for some reason. I don't know why. But I joined, and those were some of the things I was tweeting about along the way, when I was just like, let's just air all of this. It was the office mates who kept like a whiteboard of trying to make me quit Apple. They'd like make tallies. They had whiteboards of like awful nicknames for me. They created like a ticket in our development work tracking system that just said, make Ashley's life a living hell. And assigned it to one of the guys. It was like,
was that before or after you made the complaint?
Oh, this is like the first year at Apple. This is like when you said good times, and I had a little eye roll. So I was like, yeah. But I still, the role was so interesting. And there were some aspects of Apple that I really still do adore. Very logical conversations. People are very direct when you're discussing high stakes issues. It's always about the data and the crisp data, like really trying to understand what's going on, what the risks are, what the benefits are, and having a very, very open conversation about what the right thing to do is. And at Nike, the culture is kind of like, let's have 9 meetings about this, and then like a meeting about those. But like Apple, you know, like just
meeting about the meeting.
So I appreciated that, and there's a lot of really smart, amazing people at Apple. They do hire the best people, other than the managers. So I was like, you know, pushing through on that, and then I was. They kind of knew I was not happy with my team, and everyone kind of knew my team was terrible too. I got asked for a different role, you know, something a little more relaxing. I was in charge of early field failure analysis for all of software engineering. So anytime Apple would ship a new product, so the new phone, the new Mac, the new whatever, I was in charge for all software engineering of any kind of field issues with customers that caused significant returns, bad social media, bad reviews. And oftentimes it was as simple as like, someone just tweeted about this. Go figure out what's wrong with the engineering.
And could it just be like any random person on Twitter just said something like?
But it's political of like, if it's an influencer, if it's a favorite reviewer, if it's someone at a paper that Apple has a good relationship with.
Is Ashley allowed to talk specific features? I'd personally love to hear if split screen multitasking was floating around, only if she can. I don't want to get her in trouble.
Get me to break my NDA. No, Ike.
Yeah. Unfortunately, guys, right? Yeah. I know a lot of you are going to have questions like this. I'm just going to tell you straight up now, you should assume it's probably under NDA. Just straight up.
Yeah, no, even everything I'm already saying, Apple would probably argue is under my NDA and I'm violating it. And when we'll talk about this, one of my huge complaints with the federal government right now is that Apple's NDAs are unlawfully broad and vague. They can't say
they're too broad, too vague.
It's unlawful. And so arguably me talking about harassment and me talking about the toxic waste stuff is also violating my NDA. And Apple's been saying a lot of some stuff very recently as they're under federal investigation for these unlawful policies. But like they were very clear with me of like telling me not to talk to coworkers about safety concerns, and anything, literally anything is confidential if it's not public, which I'm like, no.
I mean, do you get a copy of your NDA?
Yeah, but it says Apple confidential.
What?
I mean, this is one of the things when I submitted the policies to the government, these internal policies, like the one that says we have no privacy for the rest of our lives, they'll spy on everything. It says Apple confidential too. So I'm like, okay, so I'm giving these to you, but according to Apple, me even giving you these policies to say that they're unlawful is a violation of these policies.
Oh, sweet. So Tim Cook is definitely checking out my Spicy Memes album. Tim Cook is 100% going through my iMessage and just looking at all the crap that I write in there.
I know. Well, it's, you know, and that's another kind of with the spying, the dragnet of they say to employees, we're going to spy on you 24/7, which you can't say. And I know UK has its issues too. You guys had GDPR for a second. You're in UK, right?
Yeah.
So you have your own version. I think it's supposedly some protections, but I know that you guys, I mean, we have
pretty good privacy laws.
We got our capitalism from you. So I know that like enforcement is not always perfect. But like, you can't say that you're going to spy on an employee 24/7. You just can't say that. When are they ever going to unionize? When would they ever report you to the government? When would they be able to do any of that? But then to say that you'd also spy on them talking to other people who are not employees is extra unlawful. Like, you can't do that, especially without notice, without that other person consenting to it. And then I'd have to have these conversations with the government when I was talking to when I was still an employee, especially, and when I'm talking to the government, reporting Apple's unlawful conduct. And I'd have to say, just so you know, according to their policies, they're spying on me 24/7. They have the capability of wiretap.
Oh yeah, they're 100%
of listening in real time, because they put these very invasive configurations on our phones. So they can do just about anything, keystroke recorders, all this stuff. So I have to tell them, I'm like, you should assume that Apple is listening to our phone call right now. And they're like, they can't do that. I'm like, their policies say they will.
That's nuts. So quickly, I want to say a big hello to everybody in the audience who's joined just now. Thanks for stopping by, guys. Now, we're going to quickly run through Ashley's timeline. And I do want to also let you guys know, if you are interested in Ashley's story, if there's anything we don't cover today, there's a link in the description of this stream for her website where you guys can get a ton more information, because there's so much. I'm not going to be able to cover all of it with her today. So let's start from the top. 2015 February, Ashley joins Apple. And she goes to work in software engineering. 2019, Ashley starts having fainting spells at her office. 2020 February, you moved to the Santa Clara Square apartments where you became severely ill for months and doctors couldn't figure out why.
2020. Can I interject for a section with the location?
Yeah, of course. It's your story.
So the first couple of years at Apple, I was in that software engineering team. So I was in Infinite Loop. So I was in Cupertino at that main headquarters. But in 2017, I was like so sick of all their stuff. So I was trying to, looking for another opportunity, and ended up in hardware engineering in this product integrity team. And the team I was working for, their office was in Sunnyvale. This was unfortunately very important. And so I was relocated January 2017 to this office in Sunnyvale, California, kind of north of Cupertino. And I was never told by my actual team, but it was a federal EPA Superfund toxic waste cleanup site. So I moved into that in 2017. And then when I have that fainting spell in 2019, it's in that office. And then because I get a lot of questions about this part, because they're like, she got sick at her office and her apartment. And I'm like, unfortunately, yes. So then I move into this apartment in Santa Clara in February 2020. And I start fainting all the time, like that one fainting spell I had in 2019 at my office.
You don't have a lot of luck with apartments, do you? Regardless of where it is in America.
I'm like a toxic waste detector at this point. If you want to find toxic waste, just send me and I will find it.
Jesus Christ. So we'll just quickly carry on with the timeline. You discovered in 2020 your heart rate was slowing down, premature ventricular contractions, covered in rashes, tumors. Jesus Christ. Push forward to 2020 September. Ashley discovers that her apartments were built on a Honeywell Superfund site, groundwater plume, and there is an Apple office next door that appears to have pollution on site. Again, 2020 September, you contact Apple Real Estate to inquire about the Apple office. Apple will not comment on the office, but does suggest she uses extreme condition leave time off to move out of her current apartment. Fast forward to October 2020, you move out of the apartment and you do use your special time off. Good health returns, but you're traumatized by the health crisis and also learn how polluted the area is. Fast forward to March 2021, you publish an article about the experience and struggle to get any help from the government in investigating issues. Additional victims from the apartment complex come forward after reading her article, but the government still will not help. Now, I'm going to stop at the government will not help at March 2021. Apple have got a lot of political pull, don't they, with people like Ron Sugar, Lisa Jackson. And for the audience, quickly, I think all of you will remember this one. If you don't know who Lisa Jackson is, she was standing on top of Apple Park telling you that they're not going to put charges in the box because of the environment. She's also the same person responsible for this site, which is hyper ironic. The person telling you that you can't have a charger in the box knew about a Superfund toxic site. Go figure. Can't make it up.
Well, it's probably worth also just mentioning for folks who aren't aware. So the terms like groundwater plume or vapor intrusion, so Silicon Valley is very, very contaminated. There's several of these areas across the world. Silicon Valley was from the silicon manufacturing and defense manufacturing, a lot of weapons manufacturing. And they'd spill or leak their chemicals into the ground. And I didn't know this was a thing, but in the ground, there's water, like little rivers and lakes underground. And if the chemicals get into those, they will spread in the water, as that is a thing. And those are called groundwater plumes, and they will move, and they'll move under buildings and communities and homes. And if they're close enough to the surface, those chemicals in that water will, as they're evaporating, push up into the air. And if there's a building above it, they might push up through cracks in the floor or pipes or plumbing. And then you're exposed to those chemicals. The most common chemical in Silicon Valley is called TCE. It's carcinogenic, it causes cancer, and it causes a number of health issues, including everything you read earlier about all those health issues I had.
Michael Pepper sympathizes. He's from Michigan, Flint.
Well, and then that's EPA too. So Lisa Jackson was the administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency from 2009 to 2013, I believe, under Obama.
Oh, really?
So she had the agency that
knows.
oversaw all of these environmental disasters and Superfund sites. And so she's very familiar with them. And she left due to, I don't know if you know this, she resigned from the EPA due to a scandal about her not releasing public records per our like FOIA requests. And then there was also this retaliation against one of their whistleblowers who was trying to expose chemical contamination from 9/11 and the risk, and she was silenced. And she had a lawsuit against EPA too. And EPA, they lost the lawsuit primarily because they kept trying to destroy evidence, apparently, said the judge. So she disgrace, joins Apple, and then spearheads all of Apple's environmental public relations, saying how wonderful Apple is for the environment after Apple, and continuing with Apple's long legacy of their own environmental violations, health and safety violations, the stuff that's happening in China, all this stuff. So it's a mess.
Okay, wow. That is intense. But obviously she's left the EPA, long gone. The EPA have taken your complaint on board and they're investigating.
I don't know if I'd say long gone, which I don't know if we're going to get to later, but I was worried she was still meddling because she now runs Apple's lobbying and government affairs globally. That's in the last few years. So she's very connected politically. She's on the board of the Clinton Foundation. Speaking of war crimes.
Oh, she's instantly trash. She's instantly trash.
I know.
As soon as you throw Clinton into this, she's trash.
So since like 2013, so it's all kinds
toxic herself. Irony.
Yeah, it's a mess. So she's very well connected, and I was worried, and that was something I was raising as stuff hit the fan in 2021 of like, is Lisa Jackson helping cover this up? Because the EPA, there was very weird behavior with the EPA too. And then I'd find out that she was like trying to hand select the executive to oversee my office in the fall of 2021.
How did you find out that Lisa Jackson was trying to hand select? Because I read this on your website. They basically told her you can't interfere. But how is it that you came to know that she was meddling in who was basically going to be investigating your complaint?
To be fair, they did not actually say that. It didn't choose who she said. So they could still be doing all the corruption. There's so much corruption.
Right.
So public records requests are your best friend if you want to be a corruption whistleblower or investigator. You go in at a federal level here. They're called FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act. Then like a state and local, usually Public Records Act request. And you're supposed to be able to go in and request public records from the government. You're supposed to be pretty specific about what you want and don't make it too burdensome. But I've been going in for like a year now and trying to figure out what the fuck is going. Am I allowed to curse?
Yeah.
Okay. What the fuck is going on with my office, the apartment, all these government agencies that seem to be helping cover up stuff. And I discovered that she had the current head of the EPA to Apple Park just 2 days before the EPA inspected my Apple office. And they did like a fireside chat. And I was like, what else are you talking about? So I actually filed those requests. What else are you talking about? And one of the things that came back was her sending the current head of the EPA a letter of recommendation of who she wanted to lead the regional office.
Recommendation.
Yeah. And based on the FOIA like redactions, I put like it's not the person that
there's redactions
recommended. So they redacted the name, but by like the length of the name and the characters that weren't covered, I could tell it wasn't the person who actually got the job.
Right.
Recommended. But I was like, do you not have hobbies? Like she sent it from her Apple email too.
Bloody hell. Okay, so guys, so far, if you've got any questions with regards to Ashley's kind of legal complaint and all of this, now is a good time to pitch them. I'm going to repeat this again. Don't ask her anything about product development. That's hardware or software because she is under NDA. I'm going to like keep repeating this. Okay. I'm not having Tim Cook busting down my door.
I have not and will not. I'm not going anywhere near that because it also puts everything else at risk. And I want to be very clear of, and I think we should all be talking about this and thinking about this because we need to scrutinize these NDAs these companies use, especially in Silicon Valley in the United States, of what is actually confidential. You know, they're getting caught doing so much awful stuff. And I wonder how much stuff we'd have more whistleblowers. We'd have more people who are willing to challenge stuff if they felt like they could. But when these companies claim everything's confidential and we normalize that sure may be okay.
Basically nothing gets talked about, yeah.
Nothing. And I think that has an impact to the entire public But in order to put on this and reform it, we also need to protect their actual intellectual property and protect the actual confidential stuff to say, we do understand that there's a reason that you do this for some things.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
one thing people fail to kind of understand is Apple is a multi-trillion-dollar business. And I do understand that they do need NDAs in place to keep trade secrets, whether it's something they're developing, hardware, software, their timeline for product development, stuff like that. That is perfectly reasonable to put under an NDA. But if you said to me, Petter, you can't talk to Ashley about a workplace problem that you have because that's covered under your NDA, I'm going to tell you to fuck off.
Yeah,
right?
And that's what I'm doing.
That's freedom of speech right there. And in America, that comes under your First Amendment, I believe. So technically,
that's tricky. First Amendment prohibits restrictions by the government, not private employers. So it's not really First Amendment. It's more for employees' labor protections that we need to be able to talk about. Maybe I want to join a union, or I want better benefits. I want to organize with my employees. I'm worried about workplace safety. The like benefits and conditions could be stuff about COVID safety, or more time off, or better sick leave, or stuff like. And then there's just like general things that probably no one should argue is like secret. Like Apple told us not to even talk about where we work, like our office, which meanwhile they have big signs out front with Apple logos on them. Like this is the world we live in there, where like they will say things, but they'll be like, you can't tell anyone. And so arguably I'm violating my NDA by telling people my office is a Superfund and which Superfund. But I'm like, no, that's not confidential.
Jesus.
No. Yeah.
Right, so let's just carry on with the timeline quickly. So we got to March 2021. We get to March again, 2021. Apple contacts you and your co-workers asking to test their Superfund office for vapor intrusion. Apple does not tell them it is a Superfund site or explain what vapor intrusion is. Now, key point here, guys, is Apple always knew that this office was toxic, that this space was office, and they still chose to go ahead with putting an office on that land, on that property. So
very toxic. There's a 2-kilometer plume under it that's very shallow and extraordinarily toxic. There was news articles 2 years before they decided to rent that building that called the area my office is on a paved over environmental disaster area.
Sounds about right for the modern era. Just gloss over it. Didn't happen.
They're like, oh, cheap rent. Cool.
Jesus. So you get to April now, 2021. You meet with Apple's EH&S and Environmental Health and Safety.
Yeah.
And raise concerns about the safety and circular Superfund compliance at her office. Apple tells Gjovik that employees have no right to know they work on Superfund sites. I mean, I'm going to straight away disagree with that. If somebody said to me, you want me to work on a hyper toxic site, I feel like I should have an option, a say. I worked in construction, where they say like you could potentially be exposed to asbestos. It is present. At least you're told and you have a choice. So that is just way fucked up.
We have a national right to know, which is pretty great for the US because we have such shit labor protections here generally. But the federal right to know says that if you're working around toxic chemicals, you have a right to know, and they're supposed to give you material data sheets that show what chemicals they are and what they could do to you. And the Superfunds are kind of this black hole of common sense where they're just trying to get these rich companies to help pay to clean it up, but they make so many compromises along the way. So there's very few protections that there should be. And I kind of knew there's no federal right to know for employees on Superfunds right now. And that's something that I'm pushing actually with Congress right now to try to, we should reconsider this. My story is a case study of why this is important. Is I said, Apple, we should have a right to know because there's all these chemicals. There's a history of vapor intrusion in the building. There's a good chance we could have been or could be exposed to TCE. You should be giving us information about the site, about safe practices at the site. Like there's little plugs in the floor that go underneath into the ground and I'm like, you should tell us not to touch those. And they're like, yeah, don't touch those. And I'm like, you should tell us. And they're like, no. Stupid, because then people know and they get worried and they're like, why don't you pay a little more money so I don't have to be on this cancer cluster? And they're like, because we want, the conversations never go to a good place.
I mean, was there anything about this specific location why they chose to put the office there? Is there like a specific reason other than cheap rent? Do you know? This
is part of my complaints because I started getting a really funny feeling with all the stuff that which you're about to get to on the timeline, started doing. And I'm like, why are you being so crazy? Like, they went like volume 11 insane on me. And I was trying to like figure out, this was kind of my job. I was an engineering program manager, project manager. So I'd sit with executives and try to figure out technical issues, product stuff, like, and I'd ask the hard questions and figure out what, you know, all stuff. So I'm trying to do it with them of like, I'm trying to help me understand. One thing that stood out to me when I started researching was that the responsible party for the contamination under my office, so the corporation that did that dumping, spilling, who's supposed to be cleaning up, is now Northrop Grumman, who builds bombs and missiles and warships. Yeah, and they had acquired TRW, which was a company that did a lot of that, and also like surveillance satellite stuff in the 70s and 80s. And one of the executives, longtime executives at TRW, and then CEO of Northrop Grumman, is now a longtime member of the board of directors of Apple.
And that's Ron Sugar, isn't it?
Finance and Audit Committee, Ron Sugar. And he had owned, like, he left Northrop in 2010, just joined Apple. He was still under that 5-year, like, independent director role when they suddenly decided this was a good place to rent. And then I also recently discovered that he's also on the Chevron board since 2005. He was their lead independent director, which again goes to Apple's hypocrisy about the environment. They're like one of their most senior board members is a longtime board member of Chevron.
Yeah.
But he on that board also was an executive at the company that ended up deciding to buy my office. At the same year, there were shareholder complaints at Chevron about self-dealing by both of those guys, Sugar and this guy.
So out of curiosity, I mean, Apple being a publicly traded company, shareholders have sway. For example, they petitioned Tim Cook to take like a 50% pay cut over the last fiscal, I don't know what it was, year. Has any of this got back to the shareholders who could then look at your case and say, well, hold on, we don't want Ron Sugar or Lisa Jackson on the board anymore?
So I'm not talking to any of the major groups. They have not reached out to me. I've tried reaching out to them. They don't respond. I'm kind of a pariah at this point because I'm just pointing to all the corruption, I think. And they're like, capitalism is good overall. Don't like call it all out. But I have been in talks with the SEC, or Securities Exchange Commission. I had filed a complaint before I was fired, and I called out Sugar, and I called out Jackson, and I called out the company that bought the office because I had a feeling, like, and again, like this was kind of my job at Apple, was like to go in and like figure out where huge complicated processes break down and stuff. And I had a feeling there was something going on there the way they were acting. And Apple knew I filed this complaint to the SEC. I filed one internally too with business conduct. A lot more like is cover up. This is fraud, because, and we'll probably get into that. They were really trying to cover up all these safety issues and ensure we couldn't gather any evidence and that the government didn't find out. So I was complaining to them to investigate themselves for like massive corruption and name this stuff. And they still fired me. And you can't, like, it's retaliation to fire an employee with an open SEC tip about your company during a certain amount of time. Under, you know, you have to prove it was the retaliation. But that's my SOX case with the U.S. Department of Labor now, because I was calling out concerns about, one, you're making huge fraudulent statements to our shareholders and investors about your actual environmental practices and labor. Like, clearly, like I kept pushing that and pointing to Jackson, who's going out and saying all this stuff publicly. Well, internally, they're like, you have no right to know and don't talk to your coworkers. Don't do all this stuff. And then the Sugar stuff, where I'm like, why did you choose this office? And it had been vacant for like a decade. And they were actually
with good reason
in the city. There was a long history of vapor intrusion inside too. So they were going to have an investor who would actually do all those renovations to mitigate the known vapor intrusion.
What I find bizarre, because in the UK, for example, if the local authority was aware that this was a Superfund site, they just wouldn't allow anything to be built on it. So I find it bizarre that they let them build on it in the first place.
It was, so actually they built the building in like 1967. It was a company at that time called AirTech, which was acquired by TRW. And there's this whole merge.
Who got bought by Northrop Grumman.
Satellites. I also learned this office seems to be a key point for the National Reconnaissance Office and CIA at the U.S. to build their mass surveillance satellite system that was launched in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so a lot of the work was classified. I'm still digging into that, and I have freedom of information requests to them. The NSA just declined mine, being like, national security concerns. You have to sue us. And I'm like, everything's fine. But so I'm trying to figure out like what the hell is going on. But this office, so it was already built. This is still the original office. So when it was built, it was probably okay-ish land, maybe whatever contamination was already happening nearby. But Apple decided to rent this existing building that's from the 60s that's on all this contamination. So my guess is it was vacant for like 10 years. Northrop Grumman didn't want to pay themselves to like do all that renovation that's needed to make it not just like this run down, gutted building full of TCE and next to churches and schools and homes. And I found, looking at the city, that they also had recently got complaints because people are going and doing graffiti all over the building.
Yeah.
Like there was actually on the wall of my building, one of them said like, "I like to fuck the homeless" in like spray paint, which is one of the best commentaries on capitalism I think I've ever seen is that picture.
Nice.
What is this?
Jesus.
So they're getting complaints of like, you're not even watching this building. What is going on? So I think they realized they needed someone to fund renovations and they needed a tenant inside to make like, so, and I assume he ran it by his co-Chevron board member to see if he'd be interested based on other complaints I saw that they were self-dealing. And so then all of a sudden this company and this other one decide to buy the office. They're remodeling and they couldn't find a tenant, it sounds like at first, for like 6 months.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden Apple decides to lease. And that's when I think Sugar might have gone to Apple Real Estate and been like, hey, there's this wonderful building. Great ambiance. Just a little bit of thinking. You should consider it. Right?
Funky smell, but don't worry about it.
And then so Apple decides to lease it, and then Apple's doing all their weird renovations, and they mess up all the HVAC, and we'll get into that. But then they decide to sell it in So this was they buy it in 2014, renovations, Apple stuff, 2015, and then in 2016, when employees have already moved in and they already messed up all the HVAC and were getting actively poisoned, they decide to sell it to the California government. So it's the group's called CalSTRS. It was like there's this investing arm that I didn't fully put together at first, and it was for CalSTRS, and CalSTRS is the California Teachers Retirement Fund. Is who they sell it to, and they're actually one of the biggest shareholders for Apple. They have like $3 billion of shares with Apple.
Jesus.
So that was a recent discovery in the last month that I added to my SEC and FTC charges. Where I'm like, if they didn't tell them about all the HVAC stuff and all the stuff going on, that's probably material fraud to one of your biggest shareholders too. So
that's wild.
Yeah, it is. And so the guy, and I wonder how many stories of these are actually out there that just people are too afraid to keep pulling all the threads because you don't want to know.
And I mean, while we're touching all of this, while all of this is going on, and you're filing all of these charges and complaints with the NLRB, FTC, SEC, they're running a smear campaign against you.
Well, okay. Do you want to finish the timeline? I think we're right there of when I start raising concern.
So we got to 21 of April. US EPA begins asking the responsible party, Northrop Grumman, for background information and for the status of the site. Oh, sorry, I've skipped ahead a little bit. April 2021, you met with EH&S and you raised concerns. April 2021, you started reporting their weird behavior about the site to the EPA. Again, the same month, you asked for help from Apple Relations to explain labor laws, but employee relations refuses and instead opens a sexism investigation into your boss. Despite your protest, that will only cause retaliation and you don't want an investigation.
My charges include a non-consensual sexism investigation into my manager. This is how deranged. This is where I was like, why are you being so crazy? Like, this is what
so is do you think maybe that's an image thing for them just to look like they're doing something? Or
no, I think actually they are so deranged. They know that they have such a toxic work culture. Okay, so I talked a little bit. I come in and I'm in these environments where everyone's just being awful. I'm also told on like that first team that going to HR at Apple, they called was a CLM, a career limiting move. Like it's so normalized that you should not tattle about all the misbehavior by your colleagues or bosses that they have an acronym for the retaliation. So like, and I didn't want to see this side of Apple while I was there. I really wanted to believe that I just had a few teams where things were not great. And that hardware team I ended up going into like just rampant sexism and weird behavior and comments. And I was chief executives there. And it was kind of my job to help them not do that. And like at one point, one of them, a senior director even, told me that we should do like the soccer card system, the football, where like if he's really bad, I hold the red card, and if he's kind of bad, I hold a yellow card. Like, so it's just it's gross. And I think Apple knows that it's so toxic. There's so much no retaliation that this employee relations team was really weird. So usually you have like an HR group who you have questions about benefits. Maybe you want to ask a question about your manager saying something, and they might help deal with it. Larger corporations will have these kind of employee relations teams that deal with kind of employee disputes or, a real complaint about a manager that could lead to a lawsuit or something. But this one was extraordinarily weird compared to all the other companies I've ever worked for like 20 years, where you can't contact them. They get like tapped by HR or a boss to come in. And from everything I've heard from other people too, I feel accurately call them the employee retaliations team. I think they kind of, HR kind of reports to your bosses, but I think employee relations kind of reports to like CEO and board. And they're just there to like mitigate risk and make issues go away, is what I've heard from so many stories. So they're coming in, and what they're looking to do, and again, this is not just me, I've heard from so many other people now, is you start raising a concern. They want to gaslight you. They want you to feel like it's in your head. They want to make you feel like you are being retaliated upon, and it will only increase if you continue to push on it. They want you ideally to just quit and go find another job. And there's legal reasons they want you to quit, because it's a lot harder to sue later if they fire you, or if you quit versus them firing you. Firing is a very concrete negative employment action. So if you just quit, it's harder to go back and say, I quit, but I quit because it was so intolerable. And around the time they're doing this stuff, I've been unhappy with them for a bit, but I started becoming direct with them of like, I'm not going to quit because I hear you do this all the time to get us to quit. You're going to have to fire me. Like, I'm going to keep doing
which is where it ended up.
Which is where, and you kind of know it's going to, and that's the thing. If people don't quit, they will end up getting fired. They put them on these like indefinite administrative leaves too, where all you can just like spin in your head and worry, and then usually people will just end up.
You still have a job, and
it also runs out statute of limitations for charges because you're waiting to hear from Apple about whatever. They take 6 months, years sometimes. Then it's too late to file a charge. So they're very strategic about this stuff. So they're
not stupid. They pay some good lawyers.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Some good lawyers.
And so what I think they were doing with me was knowing I was in hardware engineering, which is rampant sexism too. It's old boys club, all of that. And so I think they knew that me my bosses finding out that I complained about this and them looking into it was only going to cause retaliation. It was going to ostracize me. It was going to cause problems. And it also puts me in a situation where they're saying there's issues we want to investigate. If I tried to obstruct the investigation, they could then say I did not participate and I was like violating my business conduct, because you are supposed to report issues, right? So one of my charges is also a breach of good faith and fair dealing, because they give us these contracts that say that we have to report issues, but as soon as they do, they retaliate. Where I'm like, you're just setting us up for failure. So I had said, my boss said,
it's all basically designed to just tell you, like, shut the fuck up, carry on.
And it's very effective. The hostile work environments, all this stuff, it happens so often at Apple, but how often do you hear about it looking back like the last decade?
But then out of curiosity, and I'm sure the audience want to know as well, we've discussed the toxic culture, the whole shut the fuck up culture and everything. Yeah. They obviously developed some incredible products, right? Yep. I mean, I'm using an iPhone and a MacBook and an iPad right now.
They're also high on great all the time. Give them exceptional products, and they are all drunk on carcinogenic industrial chemicals at these offices.
So imagine how much better these products would be if they weren't. But my question to you, imagine if that's the culture, right? What's the staff turnover like? I can't imagine there's a lot of happy people in these teams, and they sound like very important teams. These are the teams that are developing the Apple Watch, the iPhone, the Mac. That's not the teams you want to have these cultural issues.
So this goes back to the old days of Apple too. You read the stories of Steve Jobs era. You read those articles from like the late 2000s about the worldwide loyalty team, what they used to call global security. Did you read that one, the Gizmodo article?
I mean, do you know what? Straight off the bat, I'm going to tell you, if you tell me there's a worldwide loyalty team, I'm going to think it's like a branch of the fucking Chinese government, not Apple.
You got to read that article if you haven't already. We should
I haven't, but I will look it up.
Incredible. It was one of like the first whistleblowers about the surveillance and toxic culture and retaliation, right?
Does that stem from Steve or?
I think a lot of it is Steve. The Steve stuff is so weird to me because he is deified a lot of the times, which I find very problematic generally when you try to deify like billionaires and CEOs and stuff. Like, I don't think we should do that. Yeah. But you could say he had vision and did some good stuff, but it's also so well known that he was a complete asshole at work. And some people even like deify that somehow him berating workers and firing people and yelling at them and flipping tables and stuff was somehow amazing, which I'm like, I beg to differ. But I think, you see these cultures a lot in a lot of these different companies. Apple's not unique. I think the unique thing about Apple is them claiming that they're not and shitting on other companies for doing the same stuff Apple does. And that's also why I've taken this interest.
Well,
it's so misrepresentative. Just don't claim you're better than the rest if you're not.
But it's all public image, isn't it? It's all PR. They love to, like, we all watch the Apple events, myself and the audience, and they love to be, we're eco-friendly. We fucking donate to Black Lives Matters.
But that's recent. And we've talked about that. That's very recent because before.
Yeah, they didn't really start being like that until what, 2020?
Lisa started with some of the environmental stuff, but I'd say 2018, there were some scandals. 2016, there was a big group of employees that were coming out trying to talk about the toxic work culture. It was in the press. It got quickly shut down. Apple hired their first IND vice president. Yeah, the Apple Gestapo, that worldwide loyalty team. So they start bringing these IND executives and it goes south really quick. One of the first ones, she's in Bogota and she starts claiming that diversity can be blonde white men with blue eyes too, can be diverse. And then Apple sends this email to reporters who was critiquing that there wasn't diversity on stage presenting, claiming that a Canadian was diverse. So they're starting to get critiqued. They're also, the inquiries about pay equity started a long time ago. So they're starting to get critiqued, getting these shareholder resolutions, and they start trying, I think, to pretend
clean up that image a little bit.
Okay. And not great, but just the basic companies trying to cover this stuff up. And it goes south really quickly. They're terrible at it. Right? They're saying this even more crazier stuff. And then it feels like they really kind of start doubling down in 2019. And they more staffing about it. And Lisa's taking over a lot of this stuff. And they really start leaning into that marketing. And I think that's also where I don't think I'm the only employee that starts getting really upset about the hypocrisy.
So would you say that during your time at Apple, you noticed some discrepancies in pay equity yourself, or?
My situation was really interesting at Apple because the boss I had at that time, who I only had for the first 8 months or so, I was 6 months in and I should have been too new to rate. They usually wait till you're there for a while before they will give you a review. And then that's when you get your bonus and stocks and stuff. But when I came in, within the first week, she was like, you're levels above what we were just expecting for this role. You're amazing. And they gave me really critical projects. I was working on they're rapid response fixes for .o releases. They trusted me with a lot of stuff. So she wanted to reward me for stepping up and taking this stuff over. So she gave me a review with exceeds, and she gave me a salary increase and then a big restricted stock grant, which once you have a certain amount of restricted stocks, they're supposed to keep it level. So because she did that nice thing for me at the beginning, my stocks were always nice once I started vesting. And by the time that last year, I was making more in RSU vesting than I was my salary. And I do consider all those together. So I don't know. I do feel at the end, I was making more money than any person should, honestly. It was almost $400,000 a year. But it was just that last year because I joined Apple while I was in debt and didn't have any savings, and you just get your salary that first year. So I really struggled. So I don't know. I think it's complicated. I'm sure that they have pay equity issues based on all of their other discrimination issues. And I know Nike did too. And actually Nike has a lot of connections to Apple. They've had shared board of directors.
Yeah, they got the Nike Apple Watch. Well,
Tim Cook's been on Nike's board of directors since 2005.
So he has. Yeah, that does ring a bell.
A lot of connections and shared discrimination. I definitely had pay equity issues at Nike there was another release manager who was like interchangeable, literally interchangeable with me. I was a redhead at that point. They're just like, which redhead? Like, go manage that
right.
go manage that deployment. And he and I were talking, and he made 30 grand more than me. I was making like 70, and he was making 30 more, which is bizarre for like this similar experience and same role. So I think it's probably it happens a lot. That wasn't one of my top concerns for me personally at Apple, though.
Okay, so we'll go back to the timeline now, and we left off at the EPA approaching Northrop Grumman for background information of the site. The EPA also then contacts Northrop Grumman to ask for their first fire inspection report for the subslat depressurization system on the roof of the site. It was written November 2020, but never submitted to the EPA. You submitted in May of 2021 a workers' compensation form for the fainting spell. Did you submit that to Apple or?
Yeah, so I had started complaining. I started looking over. So I asked if I could meet with the HS and ask questions about the building. I had learned how these sites work, unfortunately, through that apartment experience. And I took it very personally because I was on short-term disability for like 6 months. I was very, very ill. And so I'm like, wait, what? This is plan of record? So I asked, can I meet with the HS and give me a couple weeks? I want to look through the documentation for the site and get up to speed. And apparently they even told me they didn't know that meant I actually understood it all and would read it and all these questions, which I did. And I had tons of questions for them of like, it says these like the holes, those are missing, and your last testing was in 2015, and you really weren't testing between then, and it looks like your deed is out of like all these questions. And
then fast forward to June 2021, they told you have to come back to work at the Superfund site in September unless you file an ADA.
I'm telling them I don't feel like it's safe. I don't feel like you've been doing appropriate oversight. And I tell them I had that fainting spell in 2019. Now I think that fainting spell was because of the toxic chemicals. So they actually pressure me to file a workers' comp claim, which I found out later is because they try to use that to like preempt legal claims later to say you can't sue for like a toxic tort because
you were compensated.
Yeah. But like I filed it and the administrator was
sneaky bastards.
What?
Sneaky bastards. So because we compensated you, you can't sue us.
And they closed it without explanation on like a Saturday night. I got a cryptic email. They're closing it. And that Monday, there was a big announcement. They had a huge real estate deal with that Irvine company, who was the owner of my apartment, which is really suspect too.
So to carry on with that, in June 2021, they told you to file an ADA request form. You protested. Apple requests that. Apple also requests that Gjovik give access to all of your medical records. Hell of a fuck no. Apple also tells you to consider taking medical leave if she's upset about all of the retaliation, which you've told me before, like they did with COVID. They tell people to take medical leave. Next thing you know, you don't have a job. You refuse the medical leave because it doesn't fix the hostile work environment, and you do resort to requesting ADA accommodations under a multiple chemical sensitivities diagnosis due to the fear of the office.
They say the only way I can not have to go back to that office is requesting these ADA accommodations, which is another weird thing they do. And apparently they also use it to make employees feel like they just fucked up when they request. So they'll be like, request this for this thing that's clearly not a disability. And the employee does, and they're like, you just did fraud, employee. Should we come after you now? Like, it's just this whole menu of depraved behavior. But I did have a disability from the prior exposure, so I decided to do that. But it just seems so fucked up.
So then you requested a meeting with the head of employee retaliations to understand what the hell is going on. I cannot imagine that went down well. Whoever looked at that form, that email.
I called him Mr. Suicide Nets because I looked him up before he took over corporate employee retaliations. He was literally the person doing labor relations with Beijing at the factory.
With Foxconn. Yeah. Bloody hell. Mr. Suicide Nets. What a name. Jesus Christ. So
it's a vendor.
June and July, Apple will start removing you from desirable projects and reassigning you to very unfavorable projects. Now, just a quick question, because I'm going to carry on with the timeline, is what is considered an undesirable project at Apple?
It was so crazy. So they were like dropping me from stuff that was. That's a very interesting and loaded question. But so a lot of the undesirable projects are stuff you're going to be on call 24/7. You're going to be dealing with a lot of teams that don't want to deal with you on whatever this request is, or just generally difficult to deal with, who don't have appropriate resources. And then for like promotions and stuff, they generally, you know, I think this is true for all companies. This isn't special to Apple, but stuff that's very, you know, the VPs are aware of this project and it goes well and all of that kind of stuff. So you want to be on projects that are kind of set up for success and visibility. Stuff you could put on your review to say like, I worked on this and I was in charge and it went super well and we made money. Like those are going to be some of your favorable projects, and unfavorable, which were some of the ones that my boss was trying to give me, is stuff that literally belonged to other teams who had already told him to stop talking to them about what the stuff he wanted to do. And he wanted to send me in and somehow like try to get these teams to do stuff that they already said they don't want to do, and tell like them that I'm now in charge of their stuff and we're not even in the same organization.
Well, that's going to go down well.
Well, like you're setting me up for failure.
One other question now, based on something you said about being known to VPs and stuff. Again, this is kind of a personal interest. I know the audience will want to know, but who are the VPs that you've kind of interacted with during your time at Apple? Did you get to like brush shoulders with Craig or? Yeah,
so I don't want to go too much in depth with that, but a lot of them, the release management stuff, you know, I'm working with all the teams that are going to be submitting to these builds, these OS builds, operating system builds. So when there's issues, when there's high visibility stuff, you get exposure with those executives there, and definitely the executives within software engineering, kind of project management and quality. But when I ran that failure analysis stuff, they will have these war rooms, especially like phones and stuff. They get so, you know, concerned about to make sure Apple did a good job. You're sitting in these huge conference rooms with top executives from every org, and software engineering was kind of weird. Like they didn't want to send an actual executive. So they said my role, I represented like all of Craig's org and kind of Eddie's and like everyone. Arguably that role is also an unfavorable role, because they're also like, we don't want to send anyone in there that makes commitments.
Yeah. We're not sending Craig, we're sending the sacrificial lamb.
So I was kind of like public relations and liaison, and but I got to work directly with a lot of executives, and I got exceptionally positive feedback from them. They said I was the like best person that's ever been in that role, and that we were able to fix a lot of issues. I was really transparent. And then I had also through that got some kind of personal relationships with some VPs. I was mentored by a couple. One vice president even wrote a letter of recommendation for me when I applied to law school, which was lovely. So I did get a lot of exposure through that.
Oh, that's cool, man. Yeah. At least there's something positive to say.
You have to find something, otherwise you just cry constantly.
Yeah, laugh or cry. I learned that well. Yeah, I learned that well. So yeah, they started removing you from desirable projects. They quadrupled your workload. They refused to act on complaints of harassment and retaliation. They tell you can quit if you don't like it. One of your two bosses sends an email communicating as such in June, and then never contacts or responds to you again. June, July.
By June, I know I'm going to be fired, right?
Yeah, the writing's slowly on the wall now.
Yeah.
You start organizing co-workers around concerns about systemic retaliation, cover-ups of harassment and discrimination, abusive use of medical leave and ADA requests, and a chilling culture of censorship and surveillance. You start protesting Apple's overly restrictive NDAs on Apple's Slack and in smaller discussions with co-workers. July 2021, Ashley raised concerns about workplace safety related to COVID-19 as well. Internally, externally, New York Times quoted you as critiquing Apple's plan to return to work during the Delta surge.
That was before I was suspended too, and they really were not happy, and they brought it up. But it's like, the quote too is something really flippant about like, so you're going to make us go back and put our lives on the line. You're not going to even tell us why. And they weren't. They had no real justification for it. And so this is one of the very first things I did publicly, where I'm really trying to sit with this idea of secrecy versus us being able to talk about all this depraved stuff they're doing and just the way they treat us. And this is one of those first things I do. And it wasn't like terribly strategic, but it was this kind of gut feeling of, I want to start actually visualizing this boundary of what should be confidential and what's not. And
what's business appropriate and what is not.
Yes. And so this is one of those first things where I'm like, if I am criticizing Apple's request to bring us back on site without giving proper or any real justification for doing it with the Delta surge, and it's so many people that could work from home. And to me, public health wise, we're then putting a burden on people who can't work from home when we get sick and cause problems. So I'm like, I don't think this is right. There should be more flexibility. So I'm going to tell the New York Times, and they actually made me quote of the day the next day, which really infuriated Apple.
Yeah, no, Apple do not want to be in the New York Times for that sort of thing.
But I think, and it's not just me. I think there's a lot of us at Apple, and I think other companies too, but like Apple is so secret. Like they're notorious for being so secret about everything internal that are trying to say like, no, there are some things that are just very clearly not protected. Like your employee I should be able to complain publicly to whoever I want that I feel like Apple's putting my life on the line. I'm high risk for COVID complications. I should be able to complain that I feel like I'm being forced to put my health at risk and feel like there's inadequate justification. That's not trade secret.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So where were we? Yeah, July 2021, you were raising concerns internally and externally about covering out the safety issues, partially due to the prior head of the US EPA now running lobbying for Apple. I mean, I'll tell them one thing. They've got good taste in picking the right people for the right job.
So the office, one of the big things is they were going to say that they were going to test the indoor air all of a sudden. And I was like, that's good. You should be testing. But like, I'd like to know more about why now and what are you doing and all this. And then when I started raising concerns about like, it looks like you've had inadequate oversight and I had that fainting spell, all of a sudden they decided they're not going to test the air anymore without explanation. And this is also when they had to hand over that report showing that there were chemicals in our HVAC. So I think that's when they knew that they were fucked. So they're like, we're not going to test anymore. We're done talking about this. Then they come back in June where they're already doing all this crazy stuff to me too. And they say, actually also, or I think it was early July, there's cracks in the floor of your office, which is how vapor intrusion occurs. And they're like, Ashley, so just so you know, there's cracks in the floor and we are going to test the air now. But after we fix the cracks, and we're going to have people come fix the cracks, and it's fine. Just still don't tell anyone anything. And I'm like, you know that the cracks are how vapor intrusion happens. Can you please test the air before? And I say this in email, so we can understand our chemical exposure, if there was any, for cancer monitoring. And they say, no. And I'm like, okay, I'm getting really worried now that you're actually actively covering up your own negligence. You're saying and doing stuff that is very concretely like, and I also said, you should tell the EPA about the cracks. That's part of the, like Superfund oversight because cracks are part of the vapor intrusion plan. You need to tell them that there's cracks and you're going to fix them. And they said, no, we don't have to. And I said, yes, you do. And they said, no. And I told the EPA and they're like, thanks for telling us. So again, this is when I'm really like, you guys are trying to cover something up and you're being like just awful generally.
So realistically, I mean, let's say they did report themselves to the EPA and everything else. What kind of liability are they looking at?
You know, the CERCLA is the law for Superfunds. And like I said earlier, it's this huge compromise and kind of gray zone of liability because they're trying to entice these companies to put some money and effort into cleaning these sites up. So, you know, arguably them hiding stuff from the EPA, they're not really a party to it. It might blow up if they end up getting sued over it. If they're honest, I think that helps just generally with those relationships. But they're probably more worried about liability with the workers. There's something called, and this is not legal advice and go talk to a lawyer and all that stuff, but there's something called a toxic tort, where if you're exposed to some kind of toxic chemical or mold or whatever, and there's negligence on the part of someone that had a duty to make sure that didn't happen or to appropriately mitigate it, you can sue for the health issues you incur from that. So if you, and there's a Ring of Fire episode.
And how many people were in your office?
Over 100, which they say is confidential too. And that's in and out, and that's not counting like janitors and maintenance staff and other people too. And Apple has
who all exposed
on toxic waste sites. Apple Park is on a Superfund site, which has like 10,000 people. That Central Wolf campus they did in Sunnyvale is, I think, also thousands of people.
Hold on.
Waste site.
Apple Park is built on a Superfund site.
It's actually built on. So you have different levels of government that will oversee these toxic waste sites. So the whole Apple Park itself is a state-managed toxic waste site. It was the old HP campus. And then there's like some local stuff too for some of the toxic materials and waste they are actively generating. But then there's Apple, one of my other team's buildings. They really know how to pick them in product integrity. It's amazing our products have any integrity with how like exposed to crazy chemicals they are. They picked this Interstill Siemens Superfund site with a huge groundwater plume. There's even like radioactive materials known to be on that site before too. Like it's a mess. And that plume spills over this corner of Apple Park too. So it has multiple plumes, including this federal oversight. And they don't tell those employees. I brought it up. I'm like, you should tell all the employees who are on these sites, because if you feel comfortable that you are doing appropriate oversight and mitigation and you really feel it's safe, you should not be concerned to tell us. Just be very transparent. we're, engineering and very logical, rational people. We're used to sitting down and looking at the data and figuring out what to do with products. So just tell us what you did. We'll understand it. If you're doing the right thing, we're not going to have concerns. We might have questions, but also tell us how to be safe in these sites. And if we feel sick, how to report it. And they're like, don't tell anyone about your safety. Because they weren't doing good oversight, right? They don't want people to know if they were being negligent, because then you get sick. And if all of a sudden I get cancer, and the only like high risk thing I had been around over the last decade
was their office
carcinogenic chemicals. And I start doing like what I've been doing with all these public records requests to be like, what the hell was going on? And you see something like this that you could go tell a jury of what, they could end up having to pay you a lot of money for your medical expenses.
I mean, there's just so much to say. I mean, it would have been just a lot easier if they had properly mitigated all of these things, like covering up the cracks, good HVAC and stuff like that. Just put the notices up to say we've put plugs in the floor, don't move them, stuff like that. So there's a lot that they could have done, which it's a genuine shame they didn't.
It's not unusual. This is usually how companies. This is what I learned with the apartment. That it's very common to have these toxic sites, and for landlords to not tell tenants, and for bosses not to tell workers. And I started going back to the old newspapers from the 70s and 80s in Silicon Valley, when they started realizing how toxic these chemicals are and the pollution that was happening in the communities here. And there were cancer clusters, there were miscarriages, there were tons of health issues. And this is actually when high-tech workers started really pushing for unions and unionizing in Silicon Valley. It was like the 80s over this, which is not surprising at all, right? As we're talking about this, because you're like, I don't want to be exposed to this stuff. You can do bare minimum mitigations and protections and education and save my life, and you're choosing not to. So I think I need a union. And then that's around the time that these companies moved all of this silicon manufacturing to Asia.
Bloody hell. So back to your timeline now. We're in July of 2021. You started a Slack channel, a thread, asking other workers if they'd been retaliated against for simply raising concerns, and you had a lot of responses to people responding, and they privately confirmed that they suffered something similar to what you had discovered. The EPA informed Northrop, Grumman, and Apple they will be ordering a safety inspection of your office, and they arranged the inspection for August of 2021. You didn't learn about this until May 2022.
Sunnyvale City. They kept it from me.
I wonder why. Sunnyvale City requests on site hazard materials and waste inspection. The city requested that on August 19th, but Apple declined and scheduled it for September 9th of that year. They didn't
want to have both governments on site looking at all their toxic waste failures at once, apparently.
Yeah. A bit of time in between to potentially cover up anything the first one finds.
And mind you, so at this point, I am suspended. They did this really weird, and apparently this is not uncommon either, where, we had been talking about how do we mitigate this? What does a long-term solution look like? And I was very clear, like, I don't want to take leave to get away from harassment. You need to fix it. And I talked about, like, we could do like a small kind of leave, but I still want to work with coworkers about this stuff. I want to talk about this stuff. I want to keep an eye on the office, but like, you could pause my crazy ass projects with my crazy ass bosses. But I was like, we need to talk about it, be very clear about it. And we were not there, but all this stuff just happened that week before. I'm in the New York Times. EPA says, by the way, we're going to inspect Ashley's office because it sure does sound like you're up to some stuff we should be aware of. And then the city says they want to inspect. And I start this big thread where there's a bunch of people saying, which like anyone in Apple could see. And I got interrogated about it for hours after by employee retaliations, saying like, yeah, I was retaliated too. And they didn't do anything. So all this is happening. And then I'm supposed to I had escalated to that manager to say, if you're going to do a fake investigation, which of course they found no policy violations and I was just retaliated further, you should have to investigate all the shit I've gone through at Apple for 7 years. Because it's been a fucking nightmare. And I've been a team player and I still just kept trying to ship products and make it through. But like, if you're going to ruin everything and I'm going to be out anyways, you should have to kind of like the dog's nose and the poop, where I'm like, you should have to see what you did to me because it was not okay. And it wasn't. And so they finally agreed to it. And I was working with this investigator and showing, and I had like, they're so dumb there because no one speaks out. So I have like photos and videos of some of this stuff. I was like, are you ready to see the spanking video? There was one where my like senior director was talking about how I keep him in line, and it was like making a spanking gesture as he was presenting to about 80 people in my women's community group. So like I'm making them watch all this shit, and we're supposedly still going through it. And we have this meeting, and it's on the 4th, and he just shows up and he's like, actually, we're not going through any of your stuff. We're done looking through all this stuff now. And I'm like, but we're not. I still have all this stuff. And he's like, and we're putting you on leave. And I'm like, I don't want to be on leave. I want to finish all this stuff. And he's like, we're removing you from the workplace and all workplace interactions. And I was like, I told you we could talk about maybe pausing the retaliation from my managers, but I still want to talk to all these coworkers. I have all these meetings set up because everyone's like, I want to talk about my retaliation too. All these people who thought they were alone. And he's like, don't talk to your coworkers and don't go to the office. And this got just, I was so confused what was happening. They apparently do this a lot. They want to separate you from your coworkers. For my office, I had told them the next day I was going in to take pictures of the cracks in the goddamn floor because they were trying to cover them up without any evidence of what we were exposed to. And I had told them that and they knew. So he's like, you're removed from the workplace. And I'm like, I want to see the cracks. And I actually had coworkers that night before and that morning taking pictures of the cracked floor for me. And I had showed him, like, I was like, we're still trying to gather the pictures. Like, they're still going to look. And he's like, we'll get back to you at some point, maybe, about how the investigation goes. We're done. And I'm just
maybe, yeah.
It was complete bullshit. I was furious.
Question from my good friend Max here. Has there been any positive changes since you filed your complaints?
For me or for other people? Or
I think he's referring to the office with the working conditions.
I'm very concerned as I continue to keep an eye on what's happening at that office. So it recently came out with these requests, which they knew for a while, but they were hiding from me, the EPA even. So when Apple moved in, they set up, there's these, so if you're familiar with radon, that seems to be something more people are familiar with than these chemicals.
Radon.
It's like the uranium, the natural uranium, and you'll put a vent in a house where the fumes will go through the vent up to the roof instead of maybe coming into the house. They do that with these toxic waste too. So they had some of these vents on the roof where all this really toxic shit was going, and it's supposed to just kind of, go kill birds in the atmosphere, but not in the building. And Apple had put the HVAC like right next to these vents, right over my lockdown. And the EPA, when they saw this report that they had been hiding since like 2020, they're like, it's just going to pool and it's going to get sucked into the HVAC. So they were essentially taking all these toxic chemicals from under the building, putting them over the roof, and just sending them into our HVAC system. So then they would come and like.
So just circling back.
Since 2015. And so I've been very concerned about, understandably, excuse me.
Yeah, good.
So there's the, vapor intrusion testing too, but like per the documentation, they don't even know if they test, they can't even determine if it's vapor intrusion yet because they have to figure out if it's the HVAC intrusion. And then it sounds like Apple's refusing to fix the HVAC and saying like, claiming like local laws prevent them from doing it or something. So I've been trying to loop in the city and OSHA with EPA. So they're all like mutually assured destruction. And I'm like, someone needs to look at the fucking HVAC and figure out what's going on with my coworkers. And I'm very concerned because, there's a lot of people at office and I haven't heard anything from any of them, like publicly. I've talked one-on-one with one of them, but I'm very like worried. And I tell him, I'm like, don't even respond to me. I'm just sending you the public records I'm finding, but I don't want you to be a target too, because Apple's been so terrible to me. And so I'm very worried what's going on there. And I keep raising it to the government. The fact that Apple fired me for raising these concerns about this toxic exposure and for speaking out publicly about my concerns. It just tells my coworkers that if they were to raise concerns or ask questions about what's going on there, they're at risk for being fired too. While we know that there's all these risks from the Superfund itself, and now also this known HVAC, I don't even know what the fuck that is, clusterfuck. So no, sorry, I don't think anything's better. I think it's still.
Oh, okay. Sounds like nothing's got better. Sounds like employee retaliation is still a thing, and we've got HVAC sucking up.
Well, and more keep coming, trying to tell their stories. The press has not been super cooperative.
Are you having people from your office joining your cause?
Again, I have not talked to most of them. I had a couple of people kind of reach out who had kind of left. They weren't there anymore, but they had been kind of just supporting me generally. I had a lot of people who like knew how shitty my time at Apple was, and they're like, "You had a really shitty time at Apple."
I can't believe you stayed for 7 years.
Yeah,
7 years. Fucking hell, you got some patience.
I was in law school. My plan, and by the end, they were paying me so much money, and that's the thing. When I tell everyone how bad it was, and they see all this stuff, and they're like, "How did you stay?" And I was like, "I was making $386,000 a year that last year," and they're like, "I stayed."
Yeah. I'd stay too. Yeah, I would.
Yeah.
Shit. Someone told me they were going to pay me $386K for a crappy year. That's a great crappy
Apple,
year.
you get to work on this stuff that's like a once in a lifetime opportunity of really cool stuff to work on, even though you can't even say you did really. But like, I don't know. I think
so you can't even say like which iPhone you worked on or which OS release.
Probably according to Apple, they'd say I can't, but I think we all kind of find our way of, and there's really interesting conversation going on in the US right now about non-competes. Our FTC just said that they want to get rid of these non-competes, which is part of our agreement that also says we can't do work for like a year after leaving the company or while we're there.
For a competitor.
That competes with the business's interest generally, which if you're Apple, you do everything from health to satellites to phones to just about everything, right?
Where are you going to get a job?
So you can't, where are you going to go a year after, which you had asked earlier too, like why do people stay? I think the non-competes are one of the reasons. These companies are known for denylisting people after they leave. If they leave on bad terms or go to a competitor, that you're just going to be put on a kind of a quiet list of don't hire this person again. They also, these restricted stock units, we called them golden handcuffs because you'd get more each year if you had a good review, but then they vest over 4 years. So you're constantly like logging into your E-Trade, your stock account to see like how much money you'll get 4 years from then. If you stay. Because if you leave early, it all disappears. So when I was fired that like weekend after, I was like literally just staying up to watch them all disappear on like that Sunday night. I was live tweeting it too. It's still there. And it was like $600,000 that I didn't have, but was in my account and I could have had that just like disappeared in an instant.
Jesus Christ, that is absolutely mad.
Yeah.
So going back to the timeline, we're getting through it now. We're about halfway through. Where did we stop? You filed a business complaint in August. Gjovik files Apple's business conduct complaint about what believes to be a cover-up related to the office, as well as conflicts of interest with Lisa Jackson and Ronald Sugar. You asked if Sugar reported his conflict of interest when he was on the Apple board. Did he fuck? Probably. And when Apple decided to rent the office in 2014.
I cited their own policies. I mean, again, this is like I was good at my job at Apple whenever I was asked to tackle really complicated things or hold people accountable. So I'm like citing their own policies. And I'm like, per your board of directors policies, he was supposed to email general counsel about his conflicts of interest. Do you have receipt of his email? And they're like, we should get her out of here.
You're saying too much. You need to go, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I understand. Yeah. And then obviously you filed several complaints with the US DOJ, the FBI about Apple's corruption. You also blew the whistle on the surveillance of employees, coercive harvesting of employee biometrics and other private data. You filed an SEC tip about the conflicts of interest and apparent cover-up. So there is honestly no way you're not public enemy number one in that boardroom. You've gone to like every government department, the NLRB, the SEC, FTC, DOJ, FBI.
So I had this like revelation. Well, and another game they play is like they'll call it the paid administrative leave, which no one feels sorry for you because it sounds like it's paid vacation, and you kind of feel like, is this a paid vacation? But like for me, I was like, I want to take pictures of the cracks in the goddamn floor, and you're not letting me take it. I knew that they were just trying to get me away from all this stuff. But it's hard to talk about because then they're saying, and there was some email that kind of blew up. I didn't have a problem with it because they were full of shit. But he was like, as you requested, you're on paid administrative leave, which is another thing they do with all their gaslighting. And it takes forever to respond to every single one of their goddamn emails and be like, that's not what I said. And you're just making up shit now. And so there was like some confusion. But it's like all of these are confusing and it's on purpose because the company, if they end up in court, want all these ways to walk back that they weren't retaliating against the employee, that they were somehow trying to help them or taking like precautions. So I'm like stuck on this leave, and it shocked me when they did it too. So it took me a couple days for me to really realize I'm like, they're trying to fuck me over. And then I'm like, how often do they do this? Because I had all these coworkers saying this stuff. But like I decided to start looking on like legal cases and other charges to see if other employees had sued them, what they said during those cases, just get an idea. And I found really depraved stuff. And one case that really stood out to me, one of my favorite cases, this guy named Joshua Banko sued Apple in 2013. He was a hardware engineering manager, and he caught one of his employees embezzling, and he reported it to his management, and they told him to look the other way because she was a good employee. And he said,
that's wild. They know she's embezzling, but because she's so good, like, we know about it.
Going back to the like good faith, fair dealing, which he also argued and was revelatory to me when he said that, because it's right. The policies, Apple's policies say he has to report it and make sure it's dealt with. Otherwise, it's on him for letting it happen. So then he's put in a position where he's being told to violate Apple's policies. Well, he's trying to follow them. So he goes to HR and says, hey, she's embezzling. They said, look the other way, but I think you should know. And HR is like, oh, yes, we should definitely act. She'll be fired. And then like he's fired a week later. And Apple doesn't even come up with like a real reason they did it. And in fact, in court, they argue because he did not file an SEC complaint because he only complained internally, and because they argued embezzlement is not a matter of public policy, that it was not an unlawful termination.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Is it not a federal crime?
That depends on where and how you're doing it and all of that, but it is, yes. And the judge did not have it. They're like, I think fundamental to public policy is a workplace free of crime. Apple.
Jesus
so he
Christ.
won, but he was also like, that's hardware engineering. That was actually like my overall org, right? So I'm like, oh, these motherfuckers. So at that point, I know they're going to fuck me over. They're going to try to hide all these safety issues. They're going to keep retaliating against everyone. They're going to try to, all this stuff. So I'm like, I'm going to file all the complaints. Because he didn't he did lose some rights because he did not file that SEC complaint before he was fired. So I'm like, I'm going to file all of them because Apple's clearly like, they're not only going to fight me, they're going to fight the government, they're going to try to get out of this. It really was throwing everything at the wall that I could see. I'm like, something will stick. They will be held accountable for this. I can't let them get off the hook.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now I'm going to fast forward a little bit to the point where they've fired you. And you're abruptly contacted by an Apple workplace violence interrogator who demands you talk to her on the phone within an hour. You asked to keep the conversation in writing and complain to federal witness intimidation the other day before her NLRB affidavit. The interrogator swiftly suspends your account access and claims she refused to participate. You receive an email from her VP a few hours later notifying that she's been terminated. The letter does not explain what she did other than vague accusations, including failure to participate in an investigation. That same month, the day later, so September 10th, you submit your first affidavit to the NLRB for her unfair labor practice charges against Apple.
So Apple knew I had all of these charges filed against them. They were notified directly by some of the government. I had been live tweeting it all. I had this feeling also of like, I need to keep this very transparent.
I remember this.
So, and I have still been. I think there is, I don't have the way to articulate it yet, but I think there is value of knowing how this plays out in real time. And then also like just the public knowing what's happening to hold them accountable. So they must have known. It was also in the news and articles that they were being asked to comment on of Ashley's filed a DOJ complaint about public corruption. What do you think? So like they knew. And there's something with retaliation law. Again, I'm not a lawyer. You're a lawyer. Go talk to a lawyer. Not legal advice, but temporal proximity. That if you do something that's very protected and in a very short amount of time, something curious and negative happens to you by your employer, it can be inferred that that was just retaliation if it's like just a few days or a week or something. And they were on that period. And then to make matters worse, they knew that I was having my affidavit with the NLRB the next week or the next day. And they reach out and I complain of witness intimidation to them. And then he just suspends my account access. It's just so egregious.
Now, at what point was it that this one for you guys is in the audience is going to probably blow your mind a little bit. After you're terminated by Apple, you have your belongings sent back to you. And I remember this really well on Twitter. They sent you back your stuff. It was all broken. That was September or something like that of 2021, but until was it March 2022, you discovered that they planted a listening device within your property. So for that entire time period,
I think it was May, maybe April or May 2022. This is the worst.
For that entire time, are you all right?
Yeah, I mean no, because of capitalism, but yes, let's continue. Yeah.
Again, if there's anything you don't want to talk about, just tell me straight up. But yeah, they had a listening device.
This was so crazy because they had this whole like online harassment campaign with all these like very suspicious throwaway accounts too that knew way too much about me, were making all kinds of crazy threats and stuff in the beginning. So and this is actually known, like Weinstein got in trouble for doing this with McGowan too, like actually sending like spies to talk to her, pretending to be whatever. Companies have been known to do this. eBay got in trouble for Twitter harassment too, like criminal felonies. So I knew that they were like playing dirty. And I also had a really bad feeling that they were like spying on me in any way they could. The day I was fired, it occurred to me that they were like reading all of my personal email, my iCloud, and all my every like personal document I had. It hadn't, and I think it was the cognitive dissonance. I didn't want to believe that would be a thing. Like they say they will spy on us, but you're like, but if it's my personal stuff, and their policy says like, well, of course, right?
Of course.
And they have access. It wasn't encrypted. So they could just go in and read my emails with my lawyers as it's happening. They could read all of my medical documents. They could read whatever they want.
But then doesn't that constitute breaking the law? Because if it's your personal correspondence, your legal correspondence, that doesn't constitute a threat to their business. It's not in violation of an NDA or anything. That's your legal correspondence, your private stuff.
Put a pin in that, because that, this is something we're gonna have to argue. And it's the United States, so we're lawless and capitalism reigns and companies get away with a lot of stuff. And arguably even me complaining about them doing it, they say we'll break their policies, right? Which they did try to do. That'll be the reason they've tried to fire me. I think it's terribly wrong. I think there need to be boundaries. There need to be, like in an Apple, maybe they have a justification that if they think an employee really is trying to leak trade secrets or IP, working with like another government or something too, like the China spy stuff, that they would want to have resources available to them to go figure out what's happening in real time and track it. So like I can understand that, but you should have internal controls of the decisions made of when you're going to do that, why you're doing that, who you're doing that to, and it should be transparent, it should be accountable. And I'm even putting a pin in that of like, I don't even know how much I even support that, but like you shouldn't just go find any employee because they might be talking about business information, which is what their policy says. So anyhow, like it's occurred to me that morning before I'm fired of like, they're like spying. And it occurred to me, I think it was a few days after I was fired, that because I was using those Eve cameras inside that go through iCloud, that they were probably watching me in real time in my apartment.
It's creepy. That's just really creepy.
That's one of the most, there's a protocol, actually wrote an article about that it like occurred to me a day they wanted to talk to me anyways, and they put in an article because it was at my Siri HomePods too, that I realized that they were like basically just wiretaps in my apartment. So I ran around the apartment unplugging everything. So by that fall, I really had taken away as much of the spyware as I could. I realized my watch was showing them linked to iCloud, my real-time vitals. Like as they're harassing me online, they probably could even see if my like heart rate is increasing and stuff. I remember throwing it across the room.
I hope you had Apple Care.
Dystopia. So but I still, I saw weird stuff that made me worry that they were still surveilling me and reading my stuff. Like some of the online comments seemed to know what was going on and what I thought were private conversations, or seeing stuff that made me feel like my systems were being hacked. It was actually encouraged when I was complaining about this. It was after a couple of weeks where a very weird thing happened. I was on important phone calls, and just as I was about to hear something that would be helpful to me from the different people, and it was 3 different people, including the DA's office in Santa Clara County.
And was it using an iPhone?
At this point, it wasn't an iPhone. I was on, I think that was Graphene OS at that point.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and the other people might have been on iPhones too, but like the call would just like drop in that moment. And the weirdest one, I was talking to someone who was in Canada, and he was about to tell me this tool I could use to monitor my network to see if anyone was messing with my network. Wireshark, everyone install it, because Apple apparently hates it so much. They shut down both of our routers. His went down at the same moment too. So at that point, I'm like, you guys, something's fucked up. Someone told me to go get an RF detector, a radio frequency detector, and go through my apartment and just see if anything lit up. Is kind of like that first sweep of like, what the fuck is going on in here? And I had turned off like computers and phones and stuff, so it should have been quiet. And the one thing that like lit up was a statue from my fucking desk at my office that they sent back in that box of glass shards, which, don't forget too, the severed head thing, one of their online accounts.
Yeah, the severed head, yeah.
One of the accounts I found out that I'm very confident was an Apple throwaway account for like their global security team. When that package was coming, I asked people, I'm like, what do you think's inside? And they did that Seven movie like meme, which if you're not familiar with that movie, it's actually a very good movie. And But once I found out it was Apple, I was like, not okay. So they did a meme that it was inferring it would be a severed head of one of my loved ones in the package per that part of the movie. So at this point, I'm just like, what the fuck are they capable of? Who are these people? They must be on the really bad toxic waste because they're clearly out of their minds. So I'm going through the RF detector, and the statute comes up hot for RF and EM, electromagnetic frequency stuff. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. It's this little guy. It was actually a gift from one of my coworkers. It was a sweet gift. His dad was a lawyer, and when I joined law school, he got me this because it was on his dad's desk all the time. This guy with a briefcase that said, "Sue the bastards."
Sue the bastards, yeah.
I was actually curious why Apple sent back to me. I wasn't even expecting them to send my stuff back. It seemed like just they'd probably keep it or trash it or whatever. And so especially that statue, considering everything that was going on, I was like, why would they send that back? And I had a felt bottom and sand inside. It's coming up hot for RF. And like, I'm doing multiple different tests. I'm videoing it as I'm doing it. And I'm like, they put some kind of listening device in my fucking statue. And
That's
as I do,
wild.
I'm like live tweeting it and showing people, and this night I struggle with some of this more depraved stuff they've done. So I'm tweeting that I found it and saying I'm going to, call the cops and give it to the FBI and all that. But I was just going to wait till the next day. And at like midnight that night, I'm still awake because I'm like triggered as fuck. I hear
naturally, that's super creepy. That's a big invasion of your privacy to think that someone's in your house listening.
Well, that would also the impunity of I'm like, they must have thought that they would never get caught doing this. They didn't even have to do that. I'm sure there's other ways they could hack and stuff. Why would they even do that other than just to be dicks? Like, that's just crazy. Like, it's Northrop Grumman. They build the satellites that can spy on me. Why are you sending this? But so I'm tweeting it and I'm very upset. And at midnight, I hear someone messing with my locks on my door.
What?
And I'm like, that can't be. But like, there's a very distinct. So, and this is a whole other topic. But when I move in, there's these digital locks on my door from this company called Latch. That apparently like 10% of apartments now in the US, they're installing these digital only locks. You can't even use a real key. And I find this whole thing very concerning. And I want a real door and they refused to give me one, whatever. So I was very concerned that if Apple wanted to get in, they could just hack into the digital door.
And let themselves in, yeah.
And Latch is mostly run by ex-Apple people too. So maybe they just get let in. Like I was very upset about that. So I had these door bowls, these really heavy like steel things you put into the side of it.
Yeah, I'm familiar, yeah.
To like barricade. And there's a very distinctive sound when they're being raised. It's like metal on metal. And I had heard that sound. Like someone was outside with a magnet, like raising them. So I'm like, oh, hell no. What the fuck? Are they coming back to get the statue? And I was like, oh, how did they think this would play out? Because like I'm in the apartment, but I had stuck it in the freezer and they could have gone to the kitchen without me seeing them maybe. And as soon as I heard it, I'm like screaming and like, get the fuck out of here. And I like barricade the door and I call the cops the next day. I just feel crazy, like that this would be a thing and that a corporation would do it. It takes energy from my soul to say these words out loud because I don't want this to be.
Yeah, absolutely. No, God, no.
And when I call the cops, they're like, she gives me a lecture of like, you need to call us in real time during break-ins and not just go to bed with a barricaded door. And I was like,
so did they ever get to the bottom of who was actually trying to?
I'm working on that. So I did my my LLC is still based in California. I still have California data privacy protection. And I requested my data because my lock was a computer. So I'm trying to get those logs. They sent me mine, but I went back and told them I would like all logs because someone broke in and I'd like to know if there's anything in the logs about it. And they've been taking like a month and a half now to get back to me. So I'm trying to find out. I did give the statue back to, like, I gave it to the cops the next day. The FBI said, there's this weird thing where like I'm a federal whistleblower, so FBI should have jurisdiction, but FBI has a very, very friendly relationship with Apple publicly. Like we'll look at the articles. They like say they love Apple.
Yeah.
They've not been very responsive. And then the cops don't want to do too much because I am a federal witness and it's federal witness intimidation stuff. So they're going back and forth. The cops ended up taking it and said they didn't have the tools to actually like review it like they should. And she actually said, she's like, if I can't see anything with my eyes, I'm throwing it away because I don't want them listening to me either. Like I don't want it in the station. So we may never know, but like Jesus fucking Christ.
That is super fucking creepy to say the least.
And then I find out they are hacking me on my system too. I have all those logs too. I find another listening device in like a tree. And then I find out
a tree.
Oh, so I have these fake trees and I was getting rid of this one. or no, I was preparing to move and I was going over the RF again, and this one actually lit up, and I was just too exhausted to that. Like, I didn't want to have to say the words again. That Apple bugged my home stuff because I complained about toxic. Again, so I was just like, I'm not going to the dumpster. I'm just going to put it in the fucking dumpster. And I found someone dumpster diving and like trying to take it home with them. And I was like trying to talk it out of them. Like, you don't want it. Apple's in the tree. They're going to listen to you.
He probably thought you were nuts.
But I told him that. I'm like, you probably think I'm nuts, but like, you seriously don't do it. He ended up taking it. And so I actually had those tweets where I'm like, Apple, he's a good man. It was one of our maintenance guys. He's a nice guy. I was like, he's a good man. He did nothing to you. Disable the bug. But then I'm still having this weird stuff happening where it seems like they still seem to know everything I'm doing all the time. And there was this weird thing in the fall of 2021 where it sounded like there were two men in my attic of my apartment, like directly above me. And it bothered me, but I didn't want to say anything yet to the apartment complex because it sounds insane and I didn't need like another fight with anyone else. As I'm moving out, though, I'm like, okay, let's let it rip. And so I'm like, so someone was in my attic in the fall. I'm trying to figure out who the fuck it was. Was it you guys? And they're like, no. Each attic is like just above each unit. So whoever would go in would have to go through your unit. I was like, well, they clearly didn't because I was inside. So I poke my head up and it's just like really thin plywood between each of the units. And there were vacant units around me. So I go back to them and I'm like, hey, and I go up there and there's all these weird cables and cords like strewn about haphazardly in a very hot attic. And I show them and I talk and they're like, it wasn't us. It does sound like someone would have gone in through a vacant unit and gone up through that. And we don't know what those cords and cables are. We didn't do that. So I call the police again. And he's like, I'm not going to that attic. And then we have a conversation about property rights where I don't own my own attic. My landlord does. And it's a whole thing. But based on what I saw, what happened, I'm pretty sure they installed surveillance equipment to probably directly like intercept my internet, which would be if I was them and had no soul, I'd do that.
I mean,
I does that.
It just seems like the most insane overreaction to like it's not something that's an existential.
They just keep investing into more derangement, and then they've invested so much that like we can't turn back now.
We can't turn off the crazy. The crazy tap's just in full swing now.
It's crazy.
But it's a complaint about a toxic work environment, which has spiraled into people trying to break into your house, Apple putting listening devices within your property, and then going to adjacent properties to put surveillance equipment, and it's just like insane. Like it's not.
And Apple's not. This is the one thing where I start looking around and I'm like, do other companies do this? This can't be.
I can imagine Google does.
Graphic novel. I feel like it should be a graphic.
I feel like you're missing an opportunity by not writing this as a script. The only thing I'm going to say is it's definitely not making it to Apple TV Plus.
So I'm like, Apple can't be the only one. And like, part of me is like, again, it's happening to me. And I feel crazy that it's happening, and I feel crazier having to say that it's happening because it just seems so fucking insane. And capitalism I know is bad, but it's like, it can't be this bad. The eBay case was actually really enlightening to me. So if you haven't seen that eBay case, go look for it. Like, put that on your to-do list for this weekend. There were global security people at eBay who had this deranged harassment campaign against a couple that were bloggers, reporters on eBay. It was over a couple of years, and like they were like texting each other all this stuff about like destroying them, and they were doing the weird texts and stuff and surveillance. They were lying to the cops about it, and the weirdest, they sent them boxes of live spiders, boxes of live cockroaches, a bloody pig mask, a funeral wreath, and this is a DOJ case. So, and there's civil and DOJ, but DOJ has, I believe there's 4 eBay global security people who have now been sentenced to federal prison over this year.
I mean, I know Apple like to hire ex-FBI, ex-CIA for this worldwide loyalty team, which is insane.
It's more insane. It's kind of, then I'm like, I wish it was just me. I wish this was some kind of freak toxic waste overreaction thing. But then seeing that this DOJ sued eBay over doing this, over criminal felonies. So this must not be just contained to Apple or these circumstances. Uber's got in trouble for doing this. Tesla. Elon Musk swatted one of his whistleblowers. That was Martin Tripp. He swatted him. So this whistleblower called out that there were unsafe batteries, and there was a lot of waste at this Tesla factory. And Musk lost his mind. He ended up suing him, and somehow like this guy had to pay him like $1 million to Musk, but he was a whistleblower. Anyhow, so one of the things that Musk did in response,
only in America,
Musk calls the police and says Martin Tripp's there as a live shooter about to shoot up the factory, and Martin Tripp was not. But like you get like the SWAT, the like armed
yeah,
going to Martin Tripp being like, "You're trying to shoot up the factory," and he's like, "No, I'm just concerned about batteries exploding." So like, to me, the most depressing, crazy part is that this apparently is not unusual. This is apparently a feature of global security teams across these big tech companies. And like,
I think it's greed. I think a lot of it is greed, and a lot of it is we're making so much money, and we're going to keep making so much money. We will come down on you like the hand of fucking God if you fuck with our money.
Well, and I think Apple and Andrew I'll engage with Andrew's point. Apple has this culture of you don't tell anyone what's going on. You don't even talk to your coworkers. You don't question Apple. You don't question our misconduct. Everyone stays really quiet and stay in line. And we go after anyone who tries to question us or say anything negative. And this isn't just employees. There's a reporter that recently came forward about getting denylisted by Apple after he didn't go along with them. We've seen this from developers and stuff too. And I think for me, it's not just about the toxic waste. It's not just about they did not like me reporting them to the government. Like they were clear.
Yeah, no, that was never going to go down well. But
I was not just speaking out. I was trying, and still am, encourage other employees to also speak out and protest this stuff and to protest the surveillance. Surveillance is the big thing. Like Apple, they say they'll spy on us whatever they can, whatever they want. And so this might answer that the question of like, might still be an overreaction. So Apple finally came out and said why they fired me in March 2022. And I think this is going to be like their dumbest moment in history is they claimed it was because I exposed this app called Face Gobbler or Gobbler that was used. They had employees use it to help them develop the Face ID algorithms, but it was taking videos of us 24/7 and we couldn't like deactivate it from our phone. We didn't really consent. I did not really consent. I have a whole story about like the armed guard compound thing where I got tricked into a social event that wasn't a social event. And it's taking like naked pictures of us. It's taking pictures of us with our families at home, all this stuff. And because of these configuration profiles on our phones and them telling us they want us on one phone for personal and work, they have all of my biometrics. They have all these secret pictures of me. They have all this GPS information. And this was August 30th, I believe the article came out. Verge wrote an article, Apple cares about privacy unless you're an Apple employee. And
is this when you supposedly had your tits out and that's why they fired you?
I actually included a video. I redacted any kind of like text on it, but of the pictures and videos of me in that app, it was taking just constantly where I wasn't aware. And the part where I think everyone kind of understands why they went so crazy. There's the board of directors complaints and that too, which I'm sure they're pretty irate about. But I think Apple was hoping that I would not tell the government what they were talking about. They were very vague. It's a secret project. I'm like, it's not secret. And like the ear canal scanning thing, they had already said that they do that to people. It was public information. So I was very clear to the government exactly what they were talking about, sharing those photos again, sharing the videos, and also really challenging their surveillance policies. It says they could do any of this and we don't even have to really consent and all this. And I told the government all this, documented it, which is super egregious. The US does not have that great of privacy protections for private employees, but they can't do this. They can't put an app on my phone that takes secret videos of me 24/7. That is actually something in statutes, federal and state level, that you can't take pictures of your employees in bathrooms, in changing rooms. And then you have the issues that it's capturing these images of non-employees too. And if they say that this is secret and I can't tell anyone they're doing it, I couldn't warn someone standing next to me that they are not only having secret videos taken of them, but Apple's quietly capturing their biometrics to use for algorithm development of one of their products without their consent. So I really leaned into this because I feel like Apple's justification is so egregious, it could actually help create federal privacy protections for private employees.
That's actually insane. Like,
it's so stupid. So they must have been hoping, it must have been like a knee jerk, this is the reason we'll give. And I think they had to tell NLRB way before, but I don't get to see what they say to NLRB. But I think they were hoping that I would back down out of fear that they would like sue me in federal court for leaking IP. But I'm like, that's not IP. That's not trade secret. I didn't actually, share source code. I didn't share anything about an unreleased product. I shared that you are taking naked pictures of me.
Yeah, you're taking biometric data of people without consent. They're not even employees.
And even the employees, California actually has a constitutional right to privacy that applies to private employees, where even if you were to arguably consent once to certain things, you can revoke your consent and you can protest it, including GPS, the photos and videos of private places.
This sounds exactly like a UK law.
This is common sense wise, this shouldn't be a basic everywhere, even the less protected places. So them saying they fired me for protesting it also undermines their argument for consent, because they're saying any employee who then protests this stuff or talks about it could also be fired. So then you don't have consent, right? Like I think it took my bravery to say, I'm not going to hide from them. If they want to sue me in federal court for some kind of IP bullshit, I will do it, because I believe this is not protected and this should be discussed. And in my complaint that I filed, I pointed out that there's FTC rules that companies cannot make money off of algorithms developed with non-consensual data. And FTC has been taking action against companies, Facebook was one of them, I believe, who have developed algorithms with non-consensual user data. And they have to not only pay fines, but often delete the algorithm and start from scratch.
Shit.
So Apple has now entered this arena with me, arguing that I have no right to privacy for the rest of my life, and they'll spy on me whenever they want, and I don't get to protest any of their weird, deranged, whatever, and hoping that I just shut up about it. But instead, I'm like, let's see if FTC wants you to delete Face ID now.
Jesus Christ. Well, to cheer you up, here are some good comments. Ashley's becoming a lawyer now. She's the silicone Erin Brockovich. I'd hire Ashley. She leaves no stone unturned.
No.
Dallon says, I love her.
Aww,
and we've got another one from my good friend Mike. Ash is the worst case scenario for I want to speak to the manager. I think Ashley went a little bit past the manager. It went way up the chain. The manager's manager.
I would like to talk to President Biden.
I say I'd like President Biden on the phone, please. I need to speak to him about my CEO.
Yeah, that's really nice. Thank you, guys. I think, this is teaching me too, though, that even though, and I feel crazy every time I escalate further. I just filed a complaint to FTC about Apple's board, realizing there's a term called interlock directorate, where you have multiple supposed independent directors on different boards, but
they're not.
They're not. And if you have enough that are on shared boards, you basically create this mega board of directors with numerous companies.
Yeah. Shared interest.
So, and actually Apple and Ronald Sugar, the linchpin for this interlock directorate I found, that includes Chevron, Oaktree, Irvine Company, Amgen, Northrop Grumman, Nike, which actually brings in the eBay too. I was trying to figure out how they had eBay connections, because I had some weird stuff happening around that.
eBay
and
sucks.
Nike board. So I filed, and I was like, they're going to destroy me again. Right. But I feel I'm like, if I don't keep fighting this and keep trying to, all I'm doing is exposing truth and facts and stuff and giving them to the governments that are supposed to be accountable for this, and pushing on them to please also have courage like I do to try to hold Apple accountable. Because if you don't hold them accountable for any of this, what are you ever going to hold them accountable for?
It's not just about holding Apple accountable either. It's just, that's one precedent. But if you don't action on any of this, who are you ever going to action it on? Because
if you don't, you are telling people, because my case is so public, I don't get as much press coverage now, I think, as they realize just how spicy this is. And they're like, we don't want to lose our Apple News placements, our advertising. But there was a lot of mainstream coverage early on in all this too. And I think they're realizing that whatever happens with my case is going to become a public precedent. And I remind that to the government agent. I've had to fight with the government agencies who have been trying to just not actually act on some of this stuff. There's a lot of corruption with the labor agencies I've also been exposing and reporting. But I'm like, if you publicly say that a company can fire an employee who has all these open government complaints, and I didn't have to be right about the toxic waste. I didn't have to be right about the conflicts of interest. I just had to have a reasonable belief I was right. But I was fucking right. So if I'm fucking right, and there's an active safety issue that I'm trying to help expose and protect my coworkers, and they do all this crap and they retaliate, and they claim that it's totally justified because I protested really creepy surveillance and biometrics harvesting. That's not what, at least a policy precedent for all the other companies that are supposed to be held accountable by our government. And so they're saying, oh, Apple did it, so I can do it too. Hell no.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, man.
No.
That's absolutely insane. I'm just going to quickly go back to your timeline as well. We've actually gone through a lot of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, we got to March 2022 where they give formal justification for everything. You learned in May of 2022 that they did do the inspection. You won your appeal of unemployment
That's
insurance
important too. So Apple, again, they just keep punching themselves in their faces with this whole process. When they had their like position statement to the government saying why they fired me, they have to go over their version of the facts of what happened. And they failed to mention that the EPA demanded a safety inspection, found safety issues with the Superfund site, and ordered them to fix it and are ordering them to test. And instead they said the EPA told Ashley everything's fine, so she was being unreasonable.
Can't make it up.
I know.
Seriously can't make it
I
up.
know. But if I hadn't have done this public records request, I probably would have never known. So they could have gotten away with it.
So, I mean, now we're up to the end of your timeline where you finally learned that on September 9th, the city inspection did happen.
Yeah.
And you've got 3 cases all still pending, awaiting decisions. I mean, have they given you a timeline of what kind of time frame you're looking at for these cases to get verdicts or at least maybe see trial or anything like that?
So one, I decided strategically, which blew up in my face, I guess, that I wasn't going to sue in court. I was going to go through our government agencies. So it's not like a jury trial. You'll have like administrative law judges.
Okay, so it won't go to like a court.
It goes to their version of a court, but it's not like what you would see in a civil court.
Yeah.
So you'll still
like
have
a
judge,
board
or
committee
rules of evidence and that kind of stuff, but it's different. And I already did win my unemployment appeal, so I somehow there's been a lot of weird behavior within the agencies, and through this process, I discovered a lot of these conflicts of interest that Apple has in agency capture. They seem to control government agencies, and they're not the only one. There's actually a lot of articles and OIG investigations about this, of companies being able to like just get cases dismissed against them, especially employment stuff, without actual investigations. And I started seeing that when I first started filing stuff, and the agencies overseeing my cases were based around Silicon Valley. So like if you want to butter up an agency to make sure that your employees never get their cases heard, that's the one to do if you're big tech. And as soon as they're like start doing this stuff, I'm like calling them out on it or reporting to the managers again. NLRB, I got my case transferred to a different region. It's in LA. And so far it's been way better. And it sounds like there was an investigation into whatever they were doing to me on the Silicon Valley one. US Department of Labor, I'm still fighting with. So like part of the reasons mine's taking so long, I think, is because they've been like so much misconduct and I keep escalating it and just give me due process, please. Like, what is it? And then to me, that also though explains why Apple was doing all this stuff. Like they'd never be held accountable because they planned that all these places that the employees would go to tell about what they did to these employees
would be local offices, local branch.
And when I say working for Apple, I'm not exaggerating. My EEOC, I decided not to do the employment lawsuit because again, I was like, I don't want to talk about the sexism. I want to talk about the toxic waste and the corruption. That's my priority right now. So I ended up not proceeding with that one just for, I have to prioritize. But the EEOC investigator who was overseeing mine and other cases went to join Apple employee retaliations a couple months later. He literally went to work for Apple after overseeing all of the EEOC cases for the Bay Area. And then in NLRB, when I was in that Oakland office, there's 2 investigators, and the other one, not the one investigating my case, but like sitting right next to him, was actively applying to join Apple employee retaliations.
I just find it bizarre that they actually have a team called employee retaliations.
No, I call it that. They're employee relations, but it's all retaliation. So I call it
right. So
the duration, it should have been quick. It should have been like 3 months tops, and they come back and have the result. And they're way past that. I was tweeting about it last night. I was upset. It's like we're at like 512 days or something. Like we're way past those limits. The NLRB in May, my case was sent to Division of Advice in Washington, D.C. And so for NLRB, that group, they get sent cases where the case is interesting enough that whatever decision is made on it could be used to change national labor precedent policy for the entire nation, and like to change the way that a certain decision is understood. My case is really interesting for, I think it's something like Washington aluminum or something. I should know this, but it's the idea of a protected concerted activity of what you're doing that's protected by our NLRA, that there are times when it is protected when it's just you, not even with your coworker, which I had a bunch of stuff with coworkers too, but like me reporting them to the government, inherently in reporting safety concerns, even if it's just you, you're doing it for your coworkers. So in the general counsel, it said she wanted to expand that precedent. My case would be beautiful for that, to show that, like, even if you're just filing a complaint, if it's something like this, I'm filing that complaint because I don't want me or my coworkers exposed to toxic waste vapors and to get cancer. Like, that should be protected under the NLRA. They're also looking to change and expand protections around employee electronic monitoring and privacy protections, which I'm hopeful they may be considering my case for that. So if they do that, they kind of make a big show about it, and they'll get like comments and ask for amicus briefs, and they could make a big decision. And to the point earlier too of like, why is Apple freaking out so much? I also charge like all their employee policies as unlawful under the NLRA, which they could get fined for and like have to change all their employee policies to make them less crazy. And those decisions would be NLRB v. Apple, which would then be cited in so many cases going forward forever for decades.
And they're already getting looked at for antitrust and whatnot. And Tim's obviously out there trying to pull any political muscle he can to sway things their way. It's such a broad topic. Like,
I know.
The amount of ways you can talk about it and go, it's equally fascinating as it is stressful, especially for you. I mean, living it and having them on your case, pun intended. But yeah, if we look at a quick couple of comments, if I can find my mouse.
I was on an iPhone until, I just realized how much they're surveilling everything, and I want to make it harder for them. So, and I was worried about Android because it's not really secure either. So I was on Graphene OS for a while, and now I'm just on Android. I realized, like, I don't want to make it, if they're going to spy, I'm hoping at some point the FBI wakes up and can just see them spying, and I want the evidence of them spying so they can say, why are you spying on people? Why are you spying on your witnesses against you? I am on a Mac right now, though. So I haven't been able to fully give up the Mac. I kept a Mac Mini because it doesn't have a built-in camera or microphone. So I have to plug them in externally. So at least they can't like take those over. And then I used Little Snitch on it too. And whenever Apple's like, I want to talk to some random ass thing. And I'm like, no.
I might have to install this stuff after this stream.
Yeah.
So comment from Mike here is, they would have buried you in litigation if you had gone to standard civil trial. Is that why you chose to go the route you did? Okay.
Yeah. So looking at the other cases and talking to lawyers who have been involved in Apple cases, Apple has a playbook in these courts. One, they will try to choose a preferable court and judge if they can. So like for mine, I'd want to be in California state court because we do have labor protections in California. So they're going to try to move it to a federal court and just talk about IP stuff and seal everything and make sure no one has any idea what they're talking about because they're going to claim it's all secret. And then they apparently will do like all these motions and stuff that are completely unneeded, but would take up all my time in trying to respond to evidence requests. They did this to that Coalition for Fairness. They were like requested every single document the group's ever had ever. And they're like, no.
That's absolutely insane. So Dave has a question. He's interested to know if you still have friends at Apple, or did everyone just cut you off because of being scared about the consequences?
Both, and it was a process. The fall of 2021, I had to make some decisions because it was clear to me that like Apple's going to make this a fucking nightmare, but there's also a lot of stuff that I could be talking about and pushing on and change. And if I keep pushing forward, it's going to kind of change my life in several different ways. And one of them would be the group around me. And that would not just be their choice. Like I was saying with that colleague at my office, where I'm like, don't even reply to my email. I don't want them to know that you're engaging with me because I feel radioactive. So I don't want to invite harm on other people for engaging with me, which is really fucked up. And this is these are like whistleblower studies. This is something corporations do on purpose, because they want to ostracize you and alienate you, and they don't want you riling up their workers to also speak out and talk about having rights and stuff. So like it's all going to plan.
Well, they're union busting at the minute, aren't they? Because the retail store employees want to unionize.
Really bad. And so I'm glad that we have corporate cases and the retail cases too, because I think it's really important with these corporations to establish that, sometimes they're just bad actors. So it's not as hard for the next employee to come in and say, Apple did this really crazy stuff to me. And if there hadn't been, and this is another thing that stood out to me for the NLRB, before 2021, there was only like 5 NLRB charges against Apple ever, which isn't right. They have like 150,000 people, which shows that either people are too afraid to file charges or they did and then they got tossed by that agency, the corrupt agency, right? So I'm like, okay, I think it'll be good to just establish that no matter like what group it is, Apple's just trying to get people, quiet them down, make them compliant, don't want them organizing, retaliating for people that speak up, all that stuff.
That is insane.
So yes, I do have some that I still talk to, but then there's others, like a really close friend I had for years who was a senior manager there. She showed up like a month after I was fired and everything was kind of hot. And it was really like sweet, like we're gonna have a dinner. And then I find out like a week later, she left the country right after. Like she lives in another country now, and she's just gone.
As in left the country and not working for Apple, or left the country but still working for Apple?
I'm not entirely sure because she's not responding to me anymore. But she was like, I think she's afraid, as I'm sure like she knows, Apple already knows because they were reading our messages, is like she was very supportive of me and making comments too about like how crazy they were being. But like she's like very high up. So she probably realizes like
do you think that there are people in that, obviously you were moving in like a genuinely upper strata of Apple's management and just that whole upper level? I mean, it sounds to me like you were pretty much as high as you can go.
I would say maybe as like an individual contributor, that's probably true. There's a lot higher once you're like people managers and directors and that kind of stuff. And I'd say mine was the borderline kind of technical too. You'll have like architects and stuff that are like very high up, very well respected, even if they don't have teams. But I was well known, even like my reviews say it, my written reviews I still have of like, I'm one of the most connected people at Apple ever. I had a huge network, and part of it was like these teams I was on, the work I was doing, where I'd meet all these different groups. And to do a good job, I needed to understand the operations of Apple, how everything comes together. And I was always really good at that. I was doing that at Nike too. So I just kind of knew everyone. And I was actually, well documented, this evidence I was pointing out, that they would say like, Ashley's just that person. If you don't know what the answer is, you just go to Ashley and she'll help you figure it out. I was just this human like network, which it was also, I mean, it hurts for me because I did give a lot to try to making Apple better and the products great and customers happy and all of that, and feel betrayed by the way they responded. But to me, it also kind of spoke to, there's not anyone that they wouldn't fuck up if it wasn't like convenient for them. And I found
money above all.
And I like a recent case, there was an like he was a senior director in global security who is suing Apple for
because that was it. He got to like 68 or 67 or something, and they were trying to force him out or something.
So when are you retiring? I don't want to retire. So when are you sending your retirement notice? I don't want to retire. And he was like trying to reach out to general counsel because he's so high up, and being like, "Can you help?" And she's like, "No." When are you retiring? So like,
why?
It's those cases because they're assholes. I don't know. And like, but to him, like he's in that worldwide loyalty team.
Yeah, and he got screwed. Like, where's the loyalty now?
And I think that's one of these points that really worries me for coworkers too, because I was in that where you kind of, it's hard to acknowledge who Apple is while you're working there. The cognitive dissonance is incredibly overwhelming. I experienced that even before I saw this with like the factories in China and the suicide nets. Like you can't get too close to that emotionally while you work there, or you'll like lose your mind. You're like, what company am I working for? Nike was the same with the like child labor in the factories. And so I think it's hard to like really accept who they are and take their money and do all this work for them. And I think, colleagues are probably struggling with that too. And, the layoffs right now, I think are really interesting. Apple notoriously doesn't do layoffs, and they ask for loyalty, like in exchange for that. You have job security. So like
we say jump, you say how high.
So I'm really hoping to continue to be public about this and talk about everything that's going on, and really trying to push this, helps inspire people to find their own path of what makes sense for them, but kind of reckoning with these broken ass systems, whether it's Apple or another company, of like, you're right. I shouldn't have an NDA about just anything non-public. I shouldn't, have to have one phone and them spying on literally everything I'm doing all the time. Like that does seem messed up. And I want people to start challenging this. I don't think it's anything that's ever going to change overnight. Even if I win all the cases tomorrow and they're like, Ashley was right and everyone's broken, I don't think it'll change what companies do behind the scenes. But I think the more that workers kind of wake up and be like, a lot of this is just really egregious and clearly can be used to harm us if they decide on it, and really start pushing back, asking for something better. Because I think as long as people go along with it, these companies are going to try to keep doing all this crap.
Absolutely. Question again from Dave. Would you say that your experience at Apple has opened your eyes a bit more and made you think about life differently?
I will never recover from this.
All I get is flashbacks of Joe Exotic. I will never financially recover from this.
I will never recover in any way whatsoever from, like, a more lighthearted answer though of absolutely. And I think it was as this stuff was unfolding in real time where I had to be like, wait, they're doing what now? Are you serious? And then I have to like reckon, and your brain has to go in and make sense of your understanding of the world with the new information that's come in. So as I find that they put a listening device in my statue, they send it back, I'm like, okay, we have to rearrange our understanding of the world now to like make sense of this. I feel like I was really naive with these companies, which kind of
I think everyone is. Nobody, like, let's take for example my sister or any of your relatives. When you pitch Apple to them, they don't think about these things. The general person, everybody's got their own life going on. Nobody thinks about, oh, well, how do you become $1 trillion cap business and have good ethics? I just think if you go past a certain point as a company, shit gets shady.
Yeah.
But you choose how shady you want to be, how much you want to dance with the devil.
Yeah.
And some companies choose to dance with the devil more than others. And it's probably not just Apple doing this. I can imagine Google doing this. Sure. You're probably familiar with this. I mean, Google fired an employee for being pregnant. They were like,
and then they were like, if you follow her posts and her articles about that experience, Chelsea is probably one of the reasons I decided not to go to court with Apple, is watching what Google did to her. Like, they went in, she posted about this too, it's public, but Google had gone in and went to her. Wait, is this Google or I can't remember? You're talking about Chelsea, right?
Yeah.
Oh, because she went to Facebook. So she goes to they go to the new company and they request like any complaint she's ever made to them and any concerns about her that have ever had at her new goddamn company. So like they're trying, it's just a fucking nightmare. And they're dragging out the court date. They keep trying to push everything out forever. And it's really traumatic when you're sitting in this space where you're like, this awful stuff happened to me. I want justice, and the company wants to drag it out for years. Well, you still have to be providing evidence and going through this stuff and going back and forth with them and depositions. So you can't like move on from that trauma while it's stretched out. And I think they try to stretch it out on purpose because they want you to break down and just be like, I give up. Like, I tried. I give up.
And I mean, a great point by Mike, right? This is something I've personally touched on a couple of years ago. Any company that uses batteries made from cobalt isn't ethical, technically. How does Apple kind of...
They're getting sued about this right now with Tesla. There's a human rights lawsuit from children who were in the mines, I believe in DRC, Congo, dragging this stuff up. Like, they get sued over it. There's inquiries about it, but they're really good at keeping that quiet. There's an article over here and there about, Apple's involvement. But I think this kind of goes to similarly, like, the quiet about what's going on with the employees or their weird secrecy practices or whatever. They spend a lot of energy making sure that's just not part of the general conversation. And I would, critique sometimes reporters who seem to be writing articles just in isolation about certain events instead of like telling a narrative. And even like when they write about me, I'm like, I'd prefer like maybe do half about me. Don't do a whole article. Talk about the Siri privacy whistleblower from 2019, Thomas, who was the one that exposed that Apple is actually secretly recording the Siri.
Is this the company? Is this the company that was in Ireland?
Yeah. And
I remember this.
Been in the news, he had some articles, but I was like, seems really good. You could talk about Ashley and Thomas and show a systemic issue and Apple's patterns of this kind of, and they're like, no, Apple get mad about that. And if we talk about human rights violence, like bring in the cobalt stuff, bring in the conditions to the factories, bring in the other raw material issues.
I think part of the problem is if you're one of these media outlets and you have, 5-10 million subscribers from Apple News Plus, you don't want to shit where you eat.
And who's on your board of directors? Is it one of maybe Apple or Chevron or Amgen or Northrop Grumman? I think that's the pressure. Actually, the one of the guys for that company that bought my office, that funded the renovations, the botched renovations and all this stuff, who was, there were concerns about conflicts of interest between Sugar and him and Chevron, actually on the board of directors of the New York Times. I found that out because Donziger was complaining that New York Times was not. If you don't know about Stephen Donziger, go look him up. This is the number 2 on your to-do list. Go do this. Do not pass go. He, lawyer who decided to sue Chevron for their human rights abuses in South America, got like a huge win because they were doing really awful stuff. And then they decided to sue him for RICO. And they got disbarred. They sued him for contempt. He was under house arrest.
RICO, yeah, but RICO's not organized. That's not organized crime.
But you can read the articles. I won't say anything here, so they don't say that I'm the one saying it. But there's criticism in existing press articles about conflicts of interest with government agencies and judges involved in what happened with that. Like, go look into all that. It's another story, which similar and also same people involved are on Sugar, right? Of just how much this stuff can be weaponized and used to quiet people down. And he was criticizing, like, why isn't the New York Times talking about my story? Like mine, it's like, even if like you had issues with some part of it, the story itself with like the evidence of that I do have on hand is crazy enough. Everyone should be wanting to write about it, right? It's a batshit crazy story. Like his, where like they get him under house arrest for suing them for human rights violations, for like slavery in South America. But they wouldn't write. And he figured out that one of those Chevron board of directors was on the board of directors of New York Times.
This is the thing, though, as well. And even if they're not on the board of directors, Apple has such a large user base and they have their fingers in so many pies, they can very easily intimidate a lot of these outlets to not cooperate with people.
The list is so long. There's the Apple News placement, there's advertising, there's the Books app, there's Apple TV now with all their like series and programs they're running. Do they want access to the events? Do they want pre-release access to the devices to review before a launch? Do they want priority access to stories that they could break that they need to get from Apple PR? Revolving door. Do they someday want to work in Apple marketing? Like, it's just the list could. I could go like an hour. And this is not just an Apple issue. Apple's really good, and there's articles about how good Apple is at controlling the press that go back decades. Like, it's well known that their PR is very aggressive, but they're not the only ones either. And so in this, I'm also seeing this issue that's getting worse and worse as more billionaires are buying more media, that like the conflicts of interest are getting far more acute. I realized that Laurene Powell Jobs' widow, who inherited all of his money, and she has this she says it's like a like nonprofit, like for good kind of thing, but it's a for-profit LLC of her like $30 billion she got from Steve. And she bought The Atlantic in like 2018. Like, she just owns The Atlantic now. So Apple basically owns The Atlantic. It's just
that's wild.
It doesn't feel like democracy. Yeah.
Wow.
That tech guy's point is right. I think, the concerns about covering stories like mine, and I'm not the only one. There's lots of stories like these, a lot that aren't told at all either. I think because it's so egregious, it makes you question capitalism, which no players in capitalism want, right? Because if you start saying, like, how could this even happen? How could this play out this way? The answer is going to be, all these governments set up to let these corporations do whatever they want. These corporations doing centuries of human rights abuses. I mean, look at like East India Company or something. It's not new that they're doing this egregious stuff. And
the East India Company is a classic case.
They still exist. I recently discovered they have a Twitter.
I'm gonna have to look that up. Because in modern Britain, I don't think they do very well. I don't think they'd get very far with their history.
They're like a gift shop kind of thing now for imperialists that want to go buy their East India Company tea because they think it was a good idea, I guess. I don't know. Yeah.
That's absolutely insane. All right. So quick one, guys, before we kind of wrap up. Any questions you've got for Ashley, now is a good time to pitch them. I'm just going to remind you for the umpteenth time, don't ask about product development. Don't ask about software development. We're not going to discuss that on this stream. I'm not having Apple's worldwide loyalty turning up at my door.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't need it. Next thing, I'm probably after this stream, they're going to like fucking lock off my iPhone, my Mac. Like, fuck knows what's going to happen.
I hope not.
I hope not. I'll be pissed.
No.
But yeah, guys, these are the kind of streams that I want to bring you. These are the types of guests. I want to have these honest conversations. Tech is not all hunky-dory, okay? There is an ugly side to all of this, and I think you all need to remember these are multi-billion or trillion-dollar businesses. They're at the point where it's coming into the trillions. And Ashley's story is a precedent and an example of how these companies will behave if you threaten their bottom line, even if you just threaten their image. This is what happens, okay? They will turn your life upside fucking down. They will put listening devices in trees, statues, okay? I'm next. I mean, look, I tell you what, Apple, if you want to like spy on me, that's fine. I just want you to pick up my monthly bill for my dog at the vets. That's all I ask. You give me 300 smackers a month, you can spy on me all you want, you know?
On what you're saying too, I'd like to encourage folks of like, we're not going to stop. I'm using a Mac right now. After every fucking thing that's happened to me, I'm still using
you can't get away from them. They're that big.
But twist that, they need us. They need people to buy their products. If people don't buy their products, they're screwed too. So I think consumers realizing that they can have a voice, and there's different ways to do that. I think South Africa apartheid is a really great model of corporate boycotts and protests and ways to coerce companies to do not necessarily the right thing, but less wrong of things.
Yeah.
And whether you're a shareholder or you're just a dedicated consumer of their products, that should give you power to try to influence them of what you think is okay and what.
Vote with your wallet. Hit them where it hurts.
Or, you know, there's the boycotts, but then also trying to incentivize of like, I want to keep buying from you. I want to have this brand loyalty. I think it helps with influencers too and reviewers. But like, I can't stand behind you when you do. And then like the bulleted list.
XYZ. Yeah. Okay. So question from Dave. Are you still interested in tech, or has this experience put you off?
So I was actually in law school. I started in 2018 to start working in human rights. I still think I will want to work with like, you know, digital rights, freedom of expression online, surveillance issues for sure, but it'll be not from like kind of an engineering product development side. It would be from more of a legal policy side.
Okay. And a question from my friend Mike. What is the goal after this passes? Back into tech, law, non-profit?
It's a question I'm currently like asking myself every day as I'm crying into a glass of wine. You know, the stuff they've been doing, we haven't talked about everything. There's a lot of crap they've been doing to me for a year and a half that's really just made it difficult to just proceed living a normal life. And I've had to really reconsider what I wanted to do before they did any of this is definitely off the table. But then like the different versions. So I really don't know. And I think it's going to probably rely on what they continue to do to me, how these cases go. And for me, it's kind of a full-time job right now, but that's kind of okay, I guess, because I'm hopeful that it might cause some change. And I could definitely see myself, whatever I end up doing down the road, being anti-corruption, pro-privacy, reforming these mega corporations, that kind of work. Apparently, I have the courage for it. We found out the hard way. So, you know, keep it going. Again, Apple's not the only one. And it's really critical, I think, to start reining these corporations in before they just get so big that there's no chance. Another East India company that's still around like 400 years later.
They definitely need reining in. I just don't think the people currently in power in the, you know, Europe and the US are the right people for it. They're too old. They're just not the right crowd.
Are we ending with Ashley for president?
Are we ending on? Oh, Ashley for president. Why not?
You know, yeah, that would never happen.
And the last question we're going to take is Ashley using a phone with Graphene OS or something similar? Now, I think Ashley did answer this question. You said you're using a regular Android at the minute.
Now I am using a regular Android.
What is Ashley's choice of Android?
I don't even know what it is. I realized this is another thing I started actually challenging of all these like, oh, did you get the new iPhone, the new feature? They're not that different from each other.
No, they're not
different from each other. I don't really actually give a shit. I'm like, does it work? Is the camera okay? Okay. So it's, I don't know. And it's really heavy too, though. I don't like that. But I don't know. I'm not really, because of all the surveillance, I just don't use devices like that like I used to. I do a lot of stuff on paper now. I'm back to like day planners and stuff. And actually, I think that's been kind of good. I realized I was spending way too much time on my devices, and now I use them more thoughtfully. Like I still, whatever phone I have, it has a great camera. So I still like going out and taking pictures of stuff and taking advantage of features like that. But I think it's more thoughtful than just always being on my device.
Fair enough. All right. Absolute last question we're going to take. How did Apple treat you before firing you?
If we're posting this, go back and watch the beginning part.
We are posting this, yeah.
They treated me like dog shit.
Okay, guys. Well, we're going to wrap it up there. We've been going for 2.25 hours. Yeah. I don't want to take up any more of Ashley's time. But first and foremost, guys, from myself and from the audience, Ashley, a huge thank you for taking the time to come on here, share your story. I'm sure it's quite stressful talking about it and also quite tiring. We've all been there. You know, you have to tell something over and over and it gets fucking tiring. But your story is just so nuts. Like it's one of those things you have to hear it to believe it, you know. And I think where on Twitter people don't quite understand fully how deep your story goes. So I hope, you know, this stream for the audience has kind of opened their eyes to the other side of tech. But once again, a huge thank you to Ashley for coming on the channel, guys. Hopefully we'll have her back here again in the future once those NDAs are up.
Yeah.
Once she can spill beans. And yeah, guys, also...
No, that's when I'm dead, Pit. No. It says it goes till you're dead. Like, it just lasts forever.
Oh, shit. Okay, so we're never going to know.
Yeah, no.
We're never going to know.
I'm never going to tell you that stuff, but I'm always here to tell you about all of their corporate malfeasance. Happy to be back again.
Absolutely. We will definitely have you back on the stream, Ashley. Guys, for those of you in the audience, big announcement. We're actually going to have Aaron Zolo here on the stream. I can't give you a date yet. We're still working it out. But Zolo from Zolo Tech is going to be on the stream, and we're going to be talking about all things iOS, his channel, Apple again. And yeah, it should be a good one. So guys, have a good evening. I hope you've all enjoyed it. If you've got any questions, you can find Ashley over on Twitter. And like I said, I did link her website down below in the description of this video. So make sure to check it out. Comprehensive timeline, guys. Check it out. But guys, thank you for stopping by, and I will catch you all soon.
Thank you.